Hello, I'm Gil Zilkha, and this is a continuation of my series called Essential Classical Music, looking through the best recordings of the standard classical repertoire. My first video I did on the major symphony recordings, and now I will be covering the best concerto recordings. Basically, what I'm covering is repertoire that involves a soloist, or maybe sometimes two, sometimes there are even three or even four soloists, and an orchestra. Now, sometimes there are some pieces that we call concertos, and they are considered technically concertos, but I won't be covering, things like the Handel or the Corelli Concerti Grossi, or the Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, simply because those don't feature a single soloist. So mainly I'm looking at it from a performance or recording standpoint of a recording that involves a soloist and a conductor with an orchestra that are basically on the level playing field. There's that famous or infamous concert that was even actually recorded. You can even find it with Glenn Gould as the pianist and Leonard Bernstein as the conductor. And Bernstein actually had a disclaimer at the beginning where he was trying to explain, there's this old question of who's the boss, the soloist or the conductor, in terms of artistic decisions. And he wanted to make it known that even though he was conducting this Brahms first piano concerto, he wanted a disclaimer to make sure people knew that he wasn't making all the artistic decisions. Anyways, the point being that the focus of this video is a repertoire that involves a soloist who is front and center. So, for example, I won't be including the Bach Brandenburg concertos. That will be for a later video on general orchestral works. So with that said, let's begin. So again, I'll be covering the major concerto works, and I'll be going alphabetically. So the first work I'm going to cover is the Bach violin concertos. There are two of them for a solo violin and orchestra, and then there's the wonderful double concerto for two violins and orchestra. And my primary recommendation for this set of concertos is from the violinist Arthur Grumio. This is with the Les Solistes Romandes, conducted by Arpad Gerish. It was recorded in 1978. It has wonderful sound. It's very warm. It's a good sort of middle ground between what you might call the old style, the old modern style, and the more modern sort of crisp style. Everything's cleanly articulated, but it's also warm, very musical, very beautiful. And then in the double concerto, he's joined by Hermann Krebers. And you're not going to find two sweeter toned violinists performing this concerto. So this is an excellent recommendation. As well is the version by David Oistrakh. This is from the early 60s. It's with the Vienna Symphony in the two solo concertos, and then he's joined by his son, Igor, in the double concerto, as well as Eugene Goossens and the Royal Philharmonic. This is very sumptuously recorded, very sumptuously played. It's a little bit heavier than the Grumio, but not actually too much. And our artistry is off the charts. Oistrakh, of course, was one of the greatest violinists of the 20th century. And even though he was known for his playing of the romantic repertoire, he was great in classical repertoire as well. And so it's very tastefully done. So this is also a prime recommendation. Now, if you do want something a little more modern and a little bit more in the sort of current Baroque taste, we have Andrew Manze. This is with the Academy of Ancient Music. This is recorded in 1996, and this is a period instrument performance. So things are on original instruments, of course. They're more crisp. Tempos are much faster, much more brisk, and it's very exhilarating, very exciting. a really great recording. He's also joined by Rachel Podger in the double concerto. She's a wonderful violinist. So excellent choice if you want period instruments. Now, last but not least, other side of the spectrum, we have this recording from the 1930s. This is Yehudi Menuhin. Of course, this is on modern instruments. Tempos are slower. The recording quality is going to be, it's a little dim, a little bit of hiss, but the music making is just beautiful. Very warm-hearted, very, Yehudi Menuhin was he was all heart, right? And he just plays these concertos very sumptuously, you might say romantically. He's joined by Georges Enescu in the double concerto. Enescu actually is the conductor for the two solo concertos. And for example, the Adagio in the double concerto is just heart melting. It's just really, really beautiful. They're conducted by Pierre Monteux in that concerto. The orchestra is the Paris Symphony. It's a really famous old recording, not going to be to everyone's taste, but it's definitely one that you should seek out if you love these concertos. So that is the Bach set of violin concertos. Now we're going to go next in the alphabet. We're going to go to a more modern, a 20th century concerto, and that's the Barber violin concerto, the American composer Samuel Barber. And my first recommendation for this one is from 1999. This is Hilary Hahn. This is with Hugh Wolf and the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. And this concerto, it's a very beautiful concerto. It's a very sort of warm-hearted concerto. And you really hear that in this recording. Hahn has a very sweet tone. It's sort of a light group that's playing here. It's a very sweet interpretation, and also very lyrical and very virtuosic as well. And I really think the beauty of the work comes out strongly here in a very clean recording. Now, I would also recommend an older recording. This one is from Isaac Stern, American violinist with Leonard Bernstein, the New York Philharmonic, from 1964. This is, of course, American music played by American performers. It's a classic recording. And this one, the sound is maybe just a little bit more rough, but it's pretty good. It's a little bit more of a larger, a little bit heavier interpretation, more drama, I would say, in this. But it's also worth hearing. It's very, very beautiful. So that is the Barber Concerto. Now let's talk about another 20th century composer, Bela Bartok, the Hungarian composer, who was sort of in between romantic and, you might say, the modern atonal. He had his own particular type of language, musical language. He relied on Hungarian folk tunes for a lot of his music. And it's really interesting, and it's really emotional in just a different way than what we consider the typical classical tonal music. He wrote a set of 3 piano concertos, and the recording I recommend for this is sort of the old classic. This is from 1960. This is with Geza Anda on piano and Ferenc Fricsay, Hungarian conductor, conducting the Berlin Radio Symphony Orchestra. And this is just really exciting. Fricsay is a great Bartok conductor. He does a great job of setting the atmosphere. There's a real ethereal quality to the music, as well as virtuosic and exciting. The recording quality is really good. And this is really a standard for these works. There's lots of other great interpretations since then. But this is one that you should definitely hear if you're interested in these concertos. So that is Bartok. Now let's go to Beethoven. And I've added the bust here of Ludwig. He's kind of looking on the proceedings. The first concerto we're going to talk about with Beethoven, he wrote 5 piano concertos, of which the most popular are the final 3, starting with number 3. And number 3, actually, I'm going to play a little snippet, just the very beginning of it. It has this great simple tune. And then it goes from there. This was one of the first pieces that I remember liking as a teenager. I borrowed my dad's recording and I just kind of played it endlessly. And then I started playing it on the piano. Really, Beethoven was my kind of gateway into classical music, sort of playing around on the piano. For this concerto, this is an earlier Beethoven concerto. It's a little bit more of his classical style. And my primary recommendation for this is Murray Pariah on piano, accompanied by Bernard Haitink with the Concertgebouw, recorded in 1986, I believe it was, somewhere in the mid-'80s. And Pariah was a very sort of a more gentle style, very classical style, and it really fits this work well. It's very cleanly articulated, beautifully artistic, and it's a great way to get into this concerto for the first time. Now, if you want something with a little bit more oomph, a little bit more drama, I would say there's Sviatoslav Richter on piano, accompanied by Kurt Zanderling and the Vienna Symphony. This is from 1963, fairly well recorded. And Richter was a very powerful pianist, just amazing virtuoso, who recorded just about everything in the repertoire. And this performance is, compared to Pariah, I'd say it's a little bit more of a more dramatic performance. So very, very powerful. And lastly, I will also recommend an older recording from a great Beethoven pianist, Solomon. His full name was Solomon Kuttner. He's a British pianist, but he went by the name Solomon. And here he's accompanied by Sir Adrian Boult and the BBC Symphony. This was recorded in 1944. It's more dim. It's a little bit muddy. There's some hiss, but the performance is really wonderful. Solomon, he was a very powerful, virtuosic pianist, but he was also especially known for being a real thinking pianist. He very artful. So it was the combination of those two qualities that really make him a great Beethoven pianist. And this is a performance, despite the sound quality, that you should not miss if you love this concerto. Okay, so that's the third. Now let's look at the fourth. The fourth is sort of compared, especially to the later fifth that we're about to come to. The fourth is a more maybe sort of a gentler piece, a more lyrical piece. My primary recommendation for the fourth, it's a little bit of an older recording. It's still a stereo recording, but it's from 1957. This is with another Russian pianist, Emil Gilels. This is with Leopold Ludwig and the Philharmonia. Fairly well recorded. And Gilels was another great Beethoven pianist. You just can't go wrong with Gilels when it comes to Beethoven, because he combined power, this wonderful color, with an active mind and active imagination. And you really hear that here. The slow movement is just gorgeous, the way he paces it. So that's my primary recommendation for the fourth. A couple of more. And also, again, from pianists who are, not just banging it out, but thinking pianists. And one, especially for Beethoven, that comes to mind is Wilhelm Kempff. This is a 1953 recording, a mono recording, still pretty good sound, even though the orchestra is a little bit recessed, a little dim. This is with Paul van Kempen and the Berlin Philharmonic. And they recorded actually all five Beethoven concertos, legendary set of recordings. He did record it in stereo as well with Ferdinand Leitner, which is also a very good set of recordings. But I think the difference here with Van Kempen is Van Kempen was a fabulous Beethoven conductor, and he really brings a little bit more energy and power and drama to the interpretation. Kempff was just a pianist. He was very immaculate in his touch, in his artistry, It's just sounds, I don't know how to put it. He had this sort of magical quality to his playing that was very entrancing. One thing that Kemp did, which was maybe a little bit idiosyncratic, is he tended to play a little bit slower in the faster movements and a little faster in the slow movements. So a little bit kind of like Otto Klemperer as a conductor in that way. So he was kind of individual, but he was such a captivating artist that it's always worth hearing. So his Beethoven is just essential listening. Another pianist who is you might call a thinking pianist is Clifford Curzon. This recording is another mono recording. This is from 1954 with the Vienna Philharmonic and Hans Knappertsbusch conducting. This one is Curzon was also very good at the classical repertoire. It has a wonderful slow movement. He just had a very nice, delicate touch, very active, artistic mind, but also powerful. Like Solomon, he could combine both qualities. And for the fourth, which is really, I guess, in a sort of a generalizing way, it's sort of a thinking person's concerto. It's really a wonderful interpretation. As is another one of the absolute legendary Beethoven pianists, Arthur Schnabel, who, of course, did the pioneering set of Beethoven piano sonatas that display virtuosity, real powerful playing, but also especially at this imagination and this artistry, very kind of individual, which I think is something that really is essential in Beethoven. Beethoven, in my opinion, is not music that plays itself. And Schnabel did all 5 piano concertos, and this is a set from Pearl. Pearl tended to, in their historical transfers, there's a little bit more hiss, but you also hear things a little bit more naturally. Another really, really good remastering comes from Naxos. Naxos put out all these concertos as well. So this fourth, this is conducted by Sir Malcolm Sargent. This is with the London Philharmonic, 1933. And it's dim, there's hiss, but you want to hear Schnabel's artistry in this concerto. It's very powerful, very dramatic, but the artistry is just really off the charts. So that's a prime recommendation as well, despite the sound quality. All right, now let's move on to the Emperor Concerto, Concerto number 5. This is undoubtedly Beethoven's most popular of his piano concertos. And it's also, I would say, as much a conductor's piece as it is a pianist piece. It's almost like a symphony with the piano added on. And so my first choice for this is actually a mono recording. I don't usually recommend mono recordings as first choices, but it's pretty good studio mono. And it's with 2 supreme Beethoven artists, Edwin Fischer on piano and Wilhelm Furtwängler conducting the Philharmonia. This is 1951. And right from the beginning, it's just so powerful and captivating. Both of these artists are just on their game. And even though it's mono, it's pretty good mono. Sometimes once you get to like the mid-50s and you get into the stereo recordings, you get the stereo effect, but sometimes the balances are a little bit off and it sounds a little odd. Sometimes the earlier mono 50s recordings are actually better in some cases just because it's just very natural. There's just that one mic that's picking up everything, or that one location, I should say. So you hear it very naturally, and I would say that's the case of this recording. Very powerful, beautiful slow movement leading to the great finale. So that's my first choice, but there are many great versions. As the case with any great piece, you're going to have lots of artists putting in their 2 cents. So for my next choice, I will say, going back into stereo land, again, Gilels. This is paired with that fourth I just mentioned, with Leopold Ludwig conducting. Again, very powerful, beautifully artistic, recorded fairly well. It's not as good as like the most modern recordings, but it's a pretty good sounding recording. If you do want something with a little more, a little better sound quality, then I recommend Leon Fleischer, an American pianist, with George Szell and the Cleveland Orchestra. This was recorded in 1961. And this has really good sound quality. And also you get, again, this is as much a conductor's piece as it is a pianist piece. George Szell and the Cleveland, right from the opening gate, they're just hitting you with that power and that crispness and that wonderful energy that Szell always had, combined with Leon Fleischer, who was just this wonderful artist, had a really light touch. The middle movement is just really ethereal and beautiful. So this is a fantastic emperor as well. There are really so many that it's hard to say, just one. A little bit more modern recording. It comes from, it's not, I guess, so modern anymore. 1989, what is that, like 34 years ago now. This comes from Stephen Kovacevic, and he's both playing and conducting the Australian Chamber Orchestra. Sound quality, of course, is excellent. And this is a little bit of a faster interpretation, a little bit more crisp. Of course, it's a chamber orchestra, so it's a little bit more clear textures, a little bit smaller scaled, very powerful. Kovacevic is another wonderful Beethoven performer. So if you want a little bit more zip, a little bit lighter, cleaner textures, this is an excellent choice. We also have, this is a little bit of a broader, a little bit more of going back to the large scale interpretation. This is Arturo Benedetti Michelangeli. It's actually a live recording from 1979 with Carlo Maria Giulini and the Vienna Philharmonic from 1979. And again, very much a conductor's piece. So the interpretation, as Giulini tended to be, very broad, very, Giulini always kind of oozed with humanity and profundity, and that's what you get here. And it's combined with Michelangeli, who he's very clearly articulated, a very, very powerful pianist, really a great artist. So it's an unmissable combination. A few more to go. Another version that's in digital. This is from 1984. This is Claudio Arrau, another great Beethoven pianist, a wonderful artist, a thinking artist, very powerful, beautiful shaping, beautiful colors that he uses. This is with Colin Davis and the Staatskapelle Dresden. And I would say that this one is, like, say, contrasting with, say, the Fleischer-Szell. This one's not as high energy. It's a little bit more held back, and a little bit more maybe thoughtful, you might say. Really just a beautiful interpretation, a beautiful slow movement, and one that should not be forgotten if you love this concerto. Now, I still have a few more. We're going to go back a little bit older recordings. One, if I can find it here, because we just talked about it, is again Kempff, Wilhelm Kempff and Paul van Kempen. Again, Kempff's artistry is just unmistakable, and Van Kempen, compared to Leitner later, Van Kempen provides really powerful support. Really, that first movement, you just need a really great conductor to guide you through that. And so this is a great recording, 1953 mono again, not bad sounding for a 1953 recording. And we also have, again, Solomon. This one actually is a studio recording from 1955. This is with Herbert Menges and the Philharmonia. And this one sounds pretty good, and you get Solomon, who was one of the greatest of the, I would say, for me personally, you know, I don't want to necessarily rank pianists, but for Beethoven, I think of Schnabel, and then I think of Solomon right up there with him in terms of just artistry and imagination, and then combining also power and virtuosity as well. So that's a great recording. And then last but not least, we don't want to forget Schnabel with Malcolm Sargent. This is with the London Symphony. This is recorded in 1932, so it's one of the older recordings from this set, so it's going to be a little bit dim, but you need to hear Schnabel in the Emperor Concerto. It's just it's very commanding, very authoritative, and it's a vision that is really just essential if you love Beethoven. So that is the Emperor Concerto, and now we're going to move to Beethoven's masterpiece for the Violin Concerto. This is one of the great, of course, violin concerto pieces. It's a very, very noble, very, very sort of dignified concerto. It's not what I would say is sort of a virtuosic showpiece, even though the final movement has a lot of energy and spirit. It's a really a probing, almost kind of ruminative concerto. And my first choice for this comes from, if I can find it here, one of the great violinists of the 20th century. We just talked about him a little bit earlier with Bach, David Oistrakh. This is a recording with André Cluton and the French Radio National Orchestra from 1958. And Oistrakh brings the qualities of not just being a virtuoso and having this beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous, warm tone and just this smooth, beautiful legato, but he's also very much a thinking person's violinist, very, very ruminative. He also, for this concerto, I think one thing that's really good from Oistrakh is that he never lets things get out of hand. It's a very grounded interpretation, which really helps, I think, the concerto do its magic. So that's my first choice, but there are many more. Another thinking artist, a little bit later in time. This is an early digital recording. This is Itzhak Perlman with Carlo Maria Giuliani and the Chicago Symphony from 1980. This is one of the most famous Beethoven violin concerto recordings. Perlman brings the heart and the soul and the sweetness of tone. And then the combination with Giuliani is just wonderful. So this is a justly famous recording of the Beethoven concerto. Going back a little bit further in time, this is from 1962. This is Wolfgang Schneiderhan, accompanied by another great Beethoven conductor, Eugen Jochum. This is with the Berlin Philharmonic, very well recorded. And Schneiderhan is a little bit more maybe extrovert, I would say, compared to Oistrakh and Perlman in this piece. Very expressive, very beautiful. It's a very heartfelt performance, and the combination with Jochum, I would say that they're both just very natural. And it's another classic Beethoven concerto recording. Now going back further in time, and this is towards now modern recordings, is Yehudi Menuhin, and this is a famous classic collaboration with the great Beethoven conductor Wilhelm Furtwängler with the Philharmonia from 1953. And one little backstory is that Furtwängler went through a denazification process after World War II, and it came out that he had assisted Jews in escaping, and there was a lot of controversy around him for his having stayed in Germany during the war. Well, one person who came to his defense was Yehudi Menuhin, the Jewish violinist. And sort of a show of solidarity is that he performed the Beethoven Concerto with Furtwängler shortly after the war. There's a really good live recording with the Berlin Philharmonic from 1947 that you can find, for example, in the Audite box set of Furtwängler, his live Berlin recordings, which is really good, as well as a recording with the Lucerne Festival Orchestra. I think this one, though, is still the one to start with. This is, again, from 1953. It's a pretty good mono, and it's just a beautiful, heartfelt rendering of the work with these two great artists. And Furtwängler, he brings his artistry and his power to the piece, so you're going to want to hear this one. Now, going back a little further, this is a live recording from Adolf Busch with his brother conducting, Fritz Busch. He's conducting the New York Philharmonic. This is a live recording from Carnegie Hall made in 1942. And this is just a really powerful performance with another great artist that Busch was. It's a little bit more sort of rough, I would say. It's got that Beethoven power to it. And the orchestra under Fritz Busch also really brings home that power. So it's a little bit rough. The sound is, again, it's a live recording, but if you love the Beethoven Concerto, I would say this is one that you should seek out. Now, we also have some classic early recordings from some of the great violinists of the 20th century, and one that you just cannot leave out, of course, is Jascha Heifetz. Now, Heifetz recorded a version of the Beethoven Concerto that it's often coupled with the Mendelssohn because they were under the same conductor, Charles Munch, in stereo. A lot of people laud that performance. It's definitely one of the most famous recordings, and you should seek it out. In my opinion, sometimes in Heifetz's later recordings, even though you get to hear him in clear, really great sound, it sounds to me like he knows the piece so well and he can play it so quickly that he kind of whizzes through it. And for me, the work, even though I admire what Heifetz is doing, I am in awe of Heifetz himself, I feel like the actual concerto loses a little bit of its artistic power. And so for me, in this concerto, for example, I think his earlier recording, this is with Toscanini and the NBC Symphony in 1940, I think here you hear a little bit more of, I would say, commitment, a little bit more passion and drama, and the music actually breathes just a bit more here. It's this wonderful hushed intensity to the playing, and again, it's also a conductor's piece as well. And so the combination of Heifetz and Toscanini is just really wonderful. You probably should at least seek out and listen to the Munch. Again, mine is a sort of a minority opinion, perhaps. A lot of people swear by that recording. It's just not completely my cup of tea, personally. Now, you want to hear some really great artistry. Let's talk about Branislaw Huberman. This is a 1934 recording, a studio recording that actually sounds really good for its time, accompanied by George Zell and the Vienna Philharmonic. Now, you can actually get it in these historic recordings are so often issued and reissued. You can also get this in a Naxos edition, and I have them both because the couplings are both just really great as well. This one you get the Kreutzer Sonata with Ignaz Friedman, which is fantastic. But then this one you get the Tchaikovsky Concerto, which we're going to come to later, which is also essential. And then there's also Pristine has put this recording out. Pristine has their own website. They don't go through like Amazon, but you can get either digital downloads or you can have a physical copy mailed to you. Pristine is kind of what it says. It's taking the old historical recordings and making them sound as pristine as possible, and they do a fabulous job. But for now, I'm going to recommend these two fairly good quality recordings. And Huberman was just a really individual, expressive artist, wonderful imagination. He was a childhood prodigy, and he could do anything on the violin. But the thing is that he was never bringing attention to the virtuosity for its own sake. He was an artist first, and he just immersed himself in the works that he performed, and these are wonderful. It's actually a little bit on, maybe surprisingly, maybe the faster side as a basic tempo, and that may be partly because of Zell's interpretive choices. So it's a very sort of flowing interpretation, but it's just beautiful. Now, for something that's maybe not as flowing and much older, we have another king of violinists, literally, Fritz Kreisler. This is a famous old recording from 1926 with Leo Blech and the Berlin State Opera Orchestra. And Kreisler was another one of those performers who was an artist first. And this is just oozing with humanity and artistry, and that first movement has so many moments that are sort of hushed and contemplative, and he just does a beautiful job with that. You really hear more the violin here than you hear the orchestra. The orchestra is rather dim. It's 1926, so it's obviously not a primary choice for that reason. But if you love the Beethoven Violin Concerto, for me, Fritz Kreisler's artistry is just essential. All right, and that is Beethoven. So now let's move on to the next composer in the alphabet, who's someone very different, and this is Alban Berg. And he is of what they call the second Viennese school. It's moving away from your basic tonality and moving us towards more atonal. And what he specialized in was called the 12-tone technique. So it sounds very different, but it's so obviously it was experimental for its time. But it's also beautiful in its own way. And the first recording that I recommend for his most famous work, which is his Violin Concerto, is with Yitzhak Perlman and Seiji Ozawa and the Boston Symphony. This is from 1978. Very good recording quality. The orchestral support is fantastic. Ozawa does a great job. And Perlman brings his sweetness of tone, which is great in this sort of quieter, ethereal moments. But then he's also has this flair, this dramatic flair and passion that really presents the concerto well. So that's my primary recommendation for the Berg. However, another historical recording, and this one's truly historic, is from the dedicee, or the violinist, I should say, who commissioned the work, and that's Louis Krasner. And he's accompanied by another second Viennese school composer, Anton Webern. This is from 1936 with the BBC Symphony. The recording is, it's got a lot of hiss and it's somewhat muddy, but it's it's more than just a historical document. You really hear a commitment here that is just palpable. They really dig into the music, and they're really, and I guess the best way I can put it is they're really selling the piece in a way that sounds like someone discovering a great work for the first time, which of course, in fact, that's what this was. And so despite the sound quality, I think this really is an essential recording of this piece, to hear it performed in a very, very passionate, committed way. All right, so that is Berg. Now, we come to a composer who, in the pantheon of concertos, is a giant, and that is Johannes Brahms. He didn't compose very many, But what he did, he was sort of a perfectionist. He could wait a long time before committing to something. He famously took a long time for his first symphony because he felt Ludwig hovering over his shadow. So I'm going to focus on three of his concertos, and first is the two piano concertos, which are often marketed as a set. And so I'm first going to talk about sets of the two concertos together. And the first one I'm going to talk about is one of the absolute classics of the gramophone, and that is Emil Galel's with Eugen Jochum and the Berlin Philharmonic. This is from the early 70s. And this is one of my desert island concerto recordings. It just has everything. It has power, humanity, poetry, beautiful sound. Two artists who understood Brahms very well. There are some who say that it's a little bit too much on the slow, luscious side. I obviously don't agree with that. On the other hand, there are other recordings that tell other sides of the story as well, which we'll get to. But for me, it's just the beauty of the sonorities that comes through so strongly in this recording that it's just so captivating. This again is my desert island choice. But there are other wonderful recordings as well. Another one that's sort of in a similar tradition, I would say the broad, grand tradition, is Daniel Barenboim, accompanied by John Barbaroli with the New Philharmonia. This is from 1967. And these are also sort of grand, just a lot of the depth to the sound. Barbaroli is a very passionate conductor, and he brings that in these works. Again, these are works too that really the conductor and the orchestra are very important to the proceedings. And so Barbaroli also deserves credit, as does Barenboim, who just plays beautifully, wonderful color and power and grace. Now, a recording that's maybe a little bit different from these two that I just mentioned, but another great interpretation, is from Leon Fleischer. We mentioned him earlier with the Beethoven Concerto, and again, a collaboration with George Szell and the Cleveland Orchestra. First of all, Szell, again, brings that energy, that crispness. He recorded the first piano concerto. We're going to talk about some others, actually, several times. He sort of was a master at that. He really was. George Szell gets the award for accompanist. Barbaroli is actually kind of close, too. But Szell was just a wonderful accompanist for concertos. And then Fleischer brings that wonderful artistry, that beautiful touch to the adagios, as well as crispness and just beautiful artistry. The recording quality is pretty good. This is from the late 50s, early 60s. I would say that my opinion, the first concerto comes across a little bit better. I think the second concerto here is a slightly underpowered compared to others, but the artistry is still wonderful, and it's still an essential version as well. Now, going back a little further, this is a mono recording. We have versions from Solomon. This is with the Philharmonia from the late 40s, early 50s. In the first concerto, he's conducted by Raphael Kubelik, and in the second one, he's conducted by Issei Dubrovin. And like I said earlier with the Beethoven, with Solomon, you get this really supreme artistic mind, just a real thinking musician. But that doesn't mean that it's not exciting. He plays with wonderful power. He picks his spots. And he's just a wonderful. It's really great for these concertos because they're so fluid and there's such fluctuations in the dynamics that a pianist like Solomon is really one who illuminates the greatness of the works. The first concerto is recorded a little better. Was recorded in 1952. That actually sounds pretty good. The second is 1947, so it's a little bit more distant mono. But again, we're listening for the artistry in this case, not so much the sound quality. And we also have versions from Arthur Schnabel. Again, these are split onto separate discs on excellent transfers from Naxos. The first was conducted by George Szell back in 1938 with the London Philharmonic. And then the second was with Adrian Boult and the BBC Symphony. That was in 1935. I would say the first, I guess a few years make a difference because the first actually does sound a little better. Schnabel, he was famously sometimes kind of sloppy. He was a very flexible, very tempestuous performer, but it's really exciting, really beautiful in the slow movements. If you love these concertos, you're gonna want to hear Schnabel's insights as well. So that is the Brahms concertos in pairings of the first two, or at least you can take individuals and add them together. I'm going to cover a few now individual performances, and one that is really just about up there with the Gellels Jochum is Clifford Curzon, and again with George Szell, and this is with the London Symphony from 1962. This is of the first piano concerto, and this one actually complements the Gellels Jochum well, because this one does have a little bit more zip to it. The opening with Szell and the London Symphony is just fantastic, just really dramatic and powerful. And then you have Curzon, who also produces these powerful sonorities, but then just this beautiful touch that he brings to the quieter moments as well. And the recording quality, this is really a sort of a demonstration class early stereo Decca recording. So this is a classic recording of the Brahms first for good reason. Now moving on to the second, another recording that may complement the sort of slower Gellels Jochum is the earlier Gellels recording. This is with Fritz Reiner and the Chicago Symphony. This was recorded in, when was it? I think in 1958. Somewhere, I think in the late 50s. And the recording quality is pretty good. And you hear Gellels, sort of a fresher, sprightlier Gellels, and then also you have Reiner conducting the Chicago Symphony with a little bit more zip than you have, and maybe crispness than you see with Jochum. And this is just a really exciting, aggressive performance. Now, going back to maybe again, this is sort of the broader interpretation. We have this one from 1967 with Wilhelm Backhaus. We haven't discussed Backhaus yet. A wonderful Beethoven pianist, as well as Chopin and Brahms. He was somewhere, I think, around the age of 83 when this was recorded. But he still brings it, and he's accompanied by Karl Boehm and the Vienna Philharmonic. Very good sounding recording. Maybe because he was a little older, that's part of the reason it was a broader interpretation. He does have recordings which are also really good choices for both concertos from the 30s, when he was obviously more of a skilled virtuoso. But this is still really good. He brings his insights, his power, his poetry. It's a really beautifully inspired recording, and still one of the top choices for the Brahms second. As is something a little bit more on the faster, more aggressive side is Sviatoslav Richter. This was recorded around, I think, somewhere around 1960. This is with Eric Leinsdorf and the Chicago Symphony. And this is just a really powerful, assertive, strong performance of the Brahms second, which also has Richter's inimitable individuality and artistry as well. So, yeah, there are just so many great ones that I'm just going to keep listing them. I'm coming down to just one more. This is an older recording. This is from 1942. And this is with the same duo that I mentioned for the Emperor Concerto, but this is during the war, so several years earlier. This is Edwin Fischer, Wilhelm Furtwängler with the Berlin Philharmonic, recorded in that early magnetic tape. So it's rough sounding, but for 1942, it's still fairly listenable. It's just, it is kind of rough and dim. And these two artists, again, it's hard to pass up on at least hearing them out, because they're both supreme musical geniuses. This is a very powerful, assertive account, and again, it's also as much a conductor's piece as a pianist. So they bring it really strongly. All right, so that is the Brahms Piano Concertos. Now, let's talk about the Brahms Violin Concerto. This is a piece that's very close to my heart. It really was almost like a first love type thing. I mean, there were other pieces that I grew up knowing and liking, but when I discovered this one, I just felt enthralled with it. It made me a real big lover of Brahms, especially that first movement, which is just so dynamic and ruminative, and I just love it. And hallmark of a great piece is that there are going to be too many recordings to choose from, and that is the case here. There are literally dozens and dozens of really great recordings of this piece, and it's just about impossible to cover them all, but I'm going to try. It really is a piece that can be done in a lot of different ways, and they all have their merits. So I'm going to start with, as I often do, talking about a recording that to me reaches the heart of the piece, and that is by a violinist who is not quite as famous, and that is Hermann Krebers. This is from 1973 with the Concertgebouw Orchestra conducted by Bernard Haitink. The sound is fantastic, warm, and beautiful. Krebers was the concertmaster for the Concertgebouw for many decades. And so more than likely, if you come across him, you're going to see him on one of these Philips recordings that are done with the Concertgebouw. And he knew the Brahms very well. He actually did a live recording, or there is a live recording that is with Mengelberg, Wilhelm Mengelberg, who was the previous Concertgebouw conductor. That was made during the war. And so he obviously knew this piece very well. And he's maybe not the most supreme virtuoso of all time, but he obviously really felt deeply about this piece when you hear the drama and the passion that he brings to it, as well as this beautiful sweet tone that he had. I mentioned earlier the double concerto of Bach that he did with Arthur Grumiow. That is, for me, the top choice for that piece. He just brings everything that you want to hear in this. It's maybe a little bit on the slower side. For me, that works very well in that first movement, very probing. We're going to hear some other interpretations that are more sort of assertive and dramatic. But for me, this really is the top choice if I'm first coming to the Brahms Concerto. And now, one thing that's a little frustrating is this recording is out of print, and you can't even find it. At least I have not been able to find it on any of the streaming services. So I went ahead and put it on my YouTube channel so that you can hear it and judge for yourself. Now, another recording which is in sort of a similar vein, a little bit slower, a little bit more contemplative, you might say, is from Itzhak Perlman's recording with Carlo Maria Giuliani and the Chicago Symphony from 1976. Very well recorded, sounds great. Perlman brings his warmth, his passion, his humanity, his sweet tone, maybe a little bit more of a dramatic flair to his playing than Krebers. And this interpretation, it is a little bit on the slower side, a little bit dark, but I think that works really well for the concerto. So that's a top choice. I'm going to try to move as quickly as I can because there's so many for the Brahms Concerto. Now, with the Brahms Concerto, you have to mention David Oistrakh as well. He recorded it several times in the studio, and then there are also many live recordings that are also great. I think in all there may be like 13 or 14 Oistrakh Brahms concertos out there. I'm going to mention 3. Here they are. We've got this one. This is coupled with the Bach concertos I mentioned earlier. This is with Franz Konwiczny. It's a mono recording from 1954 with the Staatskapelle Dresden. We also have, pulled out the wrong one. Here we go. We also have, this is with Otto Klemperer. This is 1960 with the French Radio National Orchestra. And finally, with George Zell and the Cleveland Orchestra from 1969. Now, how do you choose between these, and then not to mention all the other Oistrachs? There's also a studio one from the early 50s with Kondrashin, which is really fantastic. Well, they're all great, is all I can tell you. If I was to sort of generalize, I might say that he was a little bit more sweet-toned in his earlier recordings, and he became a little bit more, there's a little bit more passion and drama maybe to his playing later, and also maybe sort of the large sound, warmth to the sound. But they're all great in different ways. This one, you hear the nobility of his phrasing, the beautiful artistry, the ease with which he played. These two, the playing is great in both. Maybe a little bit more secure in the earlier one with Klemperer. But the main difference is the conductors. With Klemperer, you have a little bit more warmth. And with Zell, I would say there's more energy to it right out the gate, as you typically have with Zell. And that actually, I think, affected Oistrakh too, because he's a little bit more dramatic, I would say, in this recording. But then in this one, you have just this beautiful depth to it as well. So they're both fantastic. Any of these could be top choices for the Brahms concerto. I would say, I was talking about Krebers and Perlman being a little bit more on the slow side. I would say the Oistrakh is more what you'd call your more conventional tempo. Now, for something a little faster, however, we have another legendary 20th century violinist that we've not mentioned yet, and that is Nathan Milstein. This is with Anatole Fistulari and the Philharmonia, recorded in 1960. This is a wonderful coupling, by the way. I'm going to come to the Tchaikovsky concerto later. The sound quality is fantastic on both these recordings. This is from the old full dimensional sound from Capitol Records. Kind of like the Mercury recordings and the RCA Living Stereo, these pioneering stereo recordings, in some ways they have never been duplicated. Just a beautiful warmth to the sound, a beautiful depth and realism. Milstein, as I was saying, he plays the concerto a little bit faster, and it's really riveting, just really dramatic. He also was a violinist who played with this sort of nobility of the way he phrased things. He was not usually overly expressive, but it's always beautiful, his artistry. So that is a top Brahms concerto as well. Another vintage version that is a favorite for many is with Henrik Zering. And this is with a wonderful Brahms conductor, Pierre Monteux, with London Symphony in 1958. Pretty good sound, early stereo sound. And Zering, I would say his version is, it's not overwhelming in its personality the way you might get from Oistrakh or Milstein or Perlman, but it's really natural sounding. Very earnestly communicative, just beautiful artistry, and for many reasons, it could actually be your first choice as a Brahms concerto for that reason, that you're just hearing it in all its natural beauty. So that's a great version as well. Now we have to talk about Heifetz. This is one of the most famous recordings of all of the Brahms concerto. This was recorded in 1955 with Fritz Reiner. It's one of these RCA Living Stereo recordings, so the sound quality is very good, and it's wonderful to hear Heifetz so clearly. This is coupled with the same duo did the Tchaikovsky Concerto a couple of years later. Now, again, similar to what I was saying about the Beethoven Concerto, I'm a little bit in the minority here in that while I am in awe, as is most everyone, in terms of Heifetz's virtuosity and abilities, to me, as someone who loves this concerto especially, it sounds a little bit too kind of rushed through to me. And also, it whether it was meant this way or not, I tend to focus more on just being impressed with Heifetz's abilities than I am in actually feeling the emotions of the concerto. It is a little bit on the brisk side, I will say. And for me personally, it doesn't work as well. But I am sort of in the minority. There are others who feel the same way, but at the same time, this is one of the most famous recordings, so you're going to want to at least hear this. A recording that is a little bit closer to our own time, a digital recording from 1997, comes from Anne-Sophie Mutter. This is with Kurt Masur and the New York Philharmonic, and this is a really, what I would say is a really personal rendering of the work, really kind of individual. It kind of shifts around in ways that you don't typically hear, gets really hushed and quiet at times, and I think it really works. It's just a beautiful version, very heartfelt from Mutter. So this is one to check out if you want something that's a little bit newer and maybe on the little bit, kind of different side. Going back a little bit in time, this is now, we're going into mono recordings. This is from 1954. We have Christian Ferris. This is with Karl Schuricht and the Vienna Philharmonic. Pretty decent sounding mono recording. And Ferris, this is another one of those passionate, heartfelt recordings. Ferris had this beautiful tone. It was a little bit on the raw side, but it had this kind of built-in angst to it, this emotion to his playing, which is one of the reasons why his recordings are still popular today. And the Brahms is one where that really comes across. Going back a little further, and again to a very emotional, passionate performer, this is Ginette Neveu, French violinist who died tragically young, which is why, unfortunately, we don't have her in stereo. But this is from 1946. This is with Issei de Browen and the Philharmonia. The recording is somewhat primitive by today's standards, but it's fairly clean, being a studio recording. And Neveu is one you also have to hear if you love the Brahms Concerto. She just played with such ferocity and heart. Very just a great imagination, very strong and assertive, but also poetic and beautiful, really tailor-made for this concerto. Now we come to one of my favorite versions. This is with Bronislaw Huberman, who I mentioned earlier with the Beethoven Concerto. This is a recording we're really lucky to have. This is a live recording from the Carnegie Hall, recorded in 1944 with Artur Rosinsky in the New York Philharmonic, and Huberman just plays the hell out of this piece. It's fairly fast, but it's also flexible, and it's very impassioned and dramatic. His tone, especially in these later years, he died just a few years later, it's a little bit raw. This isn't your pristine classical sounding recording, but if you want passion and drama, Huberman is your guy. Everything he did, that at least that we have record of, he put his whole heart into, and he has not just an authority with the way he's performing it. I mean, it's when you hear it, it's obvious that you can tell that he really knows the piece inside out. But we also know that because half a century earlier, he actually played the concerto as a teenager for Brahms himself. And Brahms was so impressed. They said that he was crying during the beautiful rendition of the Adagio. And then he met young Huberman and told him he wanted to compose for him a violin fantasy, which he never got to do because he only died a year later. But so obviously there is some history here as well. But that is not the main thing. The main thing is the playing. It is a live recording, so it's a little bit rough sounding, but it's fairly clear, fairly good presence to it as well. Now, there are a few other great violinists that also put in their 2 cents that I want to mention. One is, I'm going to go back to him now, believe it or not, Jascha Heifetz. I was just saying that I'm not a big fan of his recording with Reiner, despite the beautiful sound in stereo. But this recording, it's coupled with that Toscanini Beethoven concerto. This recording is with Serge Koussevitzky in the Boston Symphony from 1939. And this one is really fantastic. He does play it on the fast side, but he allows it to breathe a bit more. And maybe part of that is due to Koussevitzky. I don't know. But the virtuosity is there. The incredible tone is there, even though the sound quality is going to be more dim than what you hear later. But there's also this wonderful poetry and a little bit more of a feeling in this version, this earlier version, a little bit more of that feeling of struggle. And maybe that's what I'm missing more in the later one, where it feels like it's so easy that it almost feels like it's being tossed off, which is not something you want for a concerto like the Brahms. This one is just wonderful. I remember when the first time I heard this, when he the cadenza, my jaw literally dropped at how he performed the cadenza. Heifetz could do things that virtually nobody else could do. So this is essential listening. We also have a version from Joseph Szigeti. Here's a violinist we have not mentioned yet. This is really early. This is 1928 with Hamilton Hardy and the Halle Orchestra. And Szigeti was more of a refined violinist. He had a beautiful tone, very expressive, but he tended to hold his emotions more in check. And it's just this beautiful natural artistry. It's a really heartwarming version of the Brahms concerto. The sound, of course, is very dim. You hear the violinist more. The orchestra is more recessed. The oboe solo that begins the second movement, it's not the prettiest sound, let's put it that way. But Szigeti is the one who saves the day. It's still a great recording despite its sound. As is the earliest version, which is from Fritz Kreisler. This is from 1927. Same group as with the Beethoven Concerto, Leo Black and the Berlin State Opera Orchestra. Kreisler, again, just brings that humanity and beauty to basically everything he did. He also did a really good recording in the 30s with John Barbaroli, which I think is just about as good as this one. He's maybe a little bit more fresh sounding in this one, although I would say Barbaroli probably provides, well, I would say definitely provides with the sound quality a better orchestral support in the 30s. They're both really fantastic. I still put this one as your first choice if you want to hear Kreisler and Brahms. Just the artistry is just really great for this piece. So that is Brahms. And now we're going to move on to the final composer of the Bs, and that is Bruch, another romantic composer who wrote another one of the sort of group of 5 or 6 violin concertos that are on the pantheon of the really iconic ones. And this was actually his violin concerto number 1. He did do as second one, but the first one is the one that you want to hear first. And for this one, my first choice is Perlman with Underpreven and the London Symphony 1972. And it's just, it gives you what you want from the Bruch. It's just that warmth and beauty and romantic phrasing and heart, wonderful support from Previn. This is just a really fantastic version, and my first choice. I also recommend a little bit maybe slightly brisker version is with Heifetz, and this is one of his stereo recordings. This was made with Malcolm Sargent in 1962, so fairly late for a Heifetz recording. So it's really good sound for Heifetz. And Heifetz is just a master of this concerto. This really is one of his best recordings. Just beautiful tone. You hear the passion in this performance. The artistry is off the charts, the virtuosity. So this is also an unmissable version of the Bruch Concerto. And finally, I will also mention Kyung Hwa Chung, a wonderful violinist of mainly starting, I guess, the mid to late 60s, I think, is when her career started to flourish. This is with Rudolf Kempe and the Royal Philharmonic. This was recorded in 1972. Really good sounding recording. This is also a little bit more on the brisk side compared to, say, Perlman. It's not quite as fiery. It's a little bit more of you might say, a noble interpretation, but really beautifully done. She just had an exquisite artistry, I should say. Kempe provides wonderful support. It's just a wonderful, nicely flowing version of this concerto. So that is Bruch. Now we come to Chopin, the king of the piano. And in addition to all his many solo works, he also wrote 2 concertos for the piano. And I'm first going to recommend the first concerto is the more popular one. But first I'm going to recommend a version that includes both of them. And that's with Christian Zimmermann. This is with Carlo Maria Giuliani and the Los Angeles Philharmonic, recorded in the late 70s. And part of this is due to Giuliani also. He brings this sort of noble grandeur to the proceedings so that it doesn't just become this showpiece. And also Zimmermann, just this beautiful poetic artistry. It's a really great way to introduce yourself to these concertos. Just a beautiful, exquisite version of these wonderful works. Now, as I mentioned, the first one is the more popular one. So we also have a few versions that we should look at for number 1. And this is a very famous version. It's Maurizio Pollini. And this was sort of his breakout recording when he was a teenager from 1960. This is with Paul Kletzky and the Philharmonia. And this is not one of those overpowering virtuosic barn burners. It's more of just exquisite poetry, just beautiful artistry and wonderful pianism from Pollini. Very well supported by Kletzky. They do a great job too, the Philharmonia. We also have Martha Argerich. This is with Claudio Abbado in the London Symphony from 1968. Again, this is just the first. Argerich was just a wizard, or is. Again, I keep forgetting not all these people are not with us. Some of them are still here and still performing as well. Argerich is a wonderful virtuoso, a thinking artist, very, very individual. And she mixes wonderful virtuosity with wonderful poetry as well, and well supported by Abbado in a very well recorded version of the first. Now, a few historic recordings to look at, because especially with Chopin, there are some pianists from the first half of the 20th century that you just really need to hear if you love Chopin. And one of the chief ones is Alfred Cortot. This is the second piano concerto only. This was recorded in 1935. This is with John Barbaroli and the London Philharmonic. Fairly distant sound quality, but actually not bad for 1935. And Cortot was just a genius at Chopin. He was a genius at everything, really. But Chopin and Schumann were really his two, the composers you come across him the most in. And he just had this wonderful imagination. He was one of those artists that the best artists are the ones who make it sound as if they're composing the music on the spot, and that's what you hear with Concerto. Just beautiful artistry and wonderful support from Barbaroli and the London Philharmonic. Now, Barbaroli has some other recordings as well of the Chopin concertos with some of the genius Chopin pianists. So I guess Barbaroli is the king of the Chopin concertos, because we also have the two concertos together with Arthur Rubinstein, who is probably the most identified pianist with Chopin of the 20th century, partly because he lived long enough to record them all in stereo, or most of everything in stereo. He does have recordings from later of the two concertos, but I think these earlier recordings from the 1930s with Barbaroli and the London Symphony show Rubinstein at his freshest. And Rubinstein was just immaculate in the way he played Chopin. There's this dignity and nobility to the way he phrases things that it's really amazing. It's especially it comes out almost more strongly with a concerto, because you would think with an orchestra behind you, you'd be more apt to just sort of pound it out, but you'd never hear that with Rubinstein. He always maintains that Chopin-like grace and beauty. So these are really prime interpretations despite the sound quality. As is another legendary pianist for Chopin, as well as just about anything, Joseph Hoffmann. Hoffmann was just a virtuoso and an artist of the first rank, admired by everybody, including his peer Rachmaninoff, who could just, it felt like he could just toss off anything and just kind of like a Heifetz for the piano, I would say. And we're lucky to have this recording, because this is live. These are both concertos recorded in Carnegie Hall in the 30s. Again, Barbaroli is conducting, this time with the New York Philharmonic. And the sound quality is a little bit more rough compared to, like, say, the Rubinstein, which that was a studio recording. So it's a little bit more noisy, but you really want to hear Hoffmann play these concertos. He just has this virtuosity and this thinking mind, this artistry, just fantastic. So that is Chopin. And let's continue on through the alphabet. Now we come to Antonin Dvořák, the great Czech composer. And he wrote one of the great concertos of all time, and the prime concerto for the cello. So this is a hard one too, because every cellist worth his salt is going to record the Dvořák cello concerto. I'm going to start with, I'm not going to make waves with this one, the classic recording of the Dvořák cello concerto. Mstislav Rostropovich and Herbert von Karajan of the Berlin Philharmonic, very famous recording made in 1968. And a lot of the credit here goes to Karajan. It's just a powerhouse pairing of Karajan and Rostropovich together. Very dramatic, beautiful sonorities, very well recorded, warm-hearted, and very, very introspective. Actually, it's not. This isn't a performance that just comes right out the gate, and you know, it's not like a boat race. You know, it takes its time, and I think maybe for that reason this recording has some detractors as well. But I think it's great. I think the power and the drama of the concerto comes in really strongly here. So that is my prime choice. There are a few others I want to recommend too. One is an earlier Rostropovich. This is with Václav Talic. This is with the Czech Philharmonic from 1952. And this one you hear Rostropovich a little bit cleaner, a little bit more fresh, a little bit, you might say, virtuosic. And then Talic was a fantastic Dvořák conductor. So this is real powerful and dramatic. And the sound quality is pretty good. It's mono, but for its time, I would still say it's still pretty good, pretty listenable. Now, if you do want something that compared to the Rostropovich Carrion is a little bit more, maybe on the faster side, maybe more assertive, we have this great recording from Pierre Fournier and George Zell with the Berlin Philharmonic. This is from 1962, very well recorded. And Zell, again, he brings that crispness and that energy. And Fournier was a very, very dignified cellist, very wonderful phrasing, wonderful artistry. And this is definitely a prime choice, especially if you're one of those that finds the Rostropovich Carrion to be a little bit too lugubrious, perhaps, maybe too on the slow side. So that's a great recording. Now, if you want to hear something even faster and more crisp, we have this newer recording. This is from 2004. This is with the French cellist Jean-Guyen Queyras and the Prague Philharmonia conducted by Jiří Bělohlávek. This is from 2004 and pristine sound, wonderful sound quality. And Queyras is much more light and fleet, really flexible. That last movement really dances. And so this is a great version if you want something less on the heavy side. Now, a couple of historic choices. One is from, of course, the great cellist of the first half of the 20th century, Pablo Casals. This is with George Zell again. Zell is like everywhere, right? This is from 1937 with the Czech Philharmonic. So it has wonderful authority, and it's got this beautiful warmth to it and humanity, as Casals was always known to play with. Just a really beautiful version and recorded pretty well for 1937. However, you want to hear a recording that will really knock your socks off? I recommend this one, Emanuel Feuermann. Maybe you might consider the other giant of the first half of the 20th century among cellists. This is a live recording from 1940 conducted by Leon Barzin and a group called the National Orchestral Association. Feuermann also recorded it in 1929 with Michael Taube, and I believe it was the Berlin Staatskapelle, which is also a really good recording. But this one, I think he comes across just as strongly, but in better sound, and the orchestra actually plays the lights out of this concerto. This is a great recording. Feuermann was an amazing virtuoso on the cello, and this one is dramatic and powerful and exciting. That last movement just knocks your socks off. The recording quality is, again, it's a live recording. It's a little bit noisy. It's a little bit harsh, a little rough. But I think for a performance like this, this is an example of where a historic recording is worth the effort. Okay, so that's Dvořák. Let's go straight on to the next composer, Elgar, and the next big cello concerto. And that is Elgar's cello concerto. And this one is, I hate to say anything is a no-brainer, but everyone has to hear Jacqueline Dupre playing the cello and accompanied by John Barbaroli. This is with the London Symphony, recorded in 1965. And it's one of the most famous classical recordings of all time. Of course, we know the story, the tragic story with Dupre, as she died very young. So her career was cut short. And there's a movie called Hilary and Jackie where they keep showing her play this recording, this concerto over and over again. It was obviously very identified with Dupre, and for good reason. It's just passionate, heartfelt, just warm-hearted, just really brings home the emotions of the concerto. And with a partner like Barbaroli, who was an excellent Elgarian, this is just a very magic recording. I don't have too much else to recommend beyond that, although there is an earlier Barbaroli recording that I do want to recommend. And this is from 1957, so the sound is a little bit more rough, but this is with Andre Navarre. Do I have that right? Andre Navarra, again with Barbaroli, and this is with the Halle Orchestra. And this is also a very warm-hearted, beautiful version. It has a lot of energy to it too. The orchestra plays very well. And it's coupled on this recording with prime recommendation, which I'll get to in my next video, hopefully, the Enigma variations that Barber did with Holly. So that's also a really good version to look at. Okay, so that was Elgar. Now, let's go to the other side of the Atlantic. Let's look at an American composer, George Gershwin. Rhapsody in Blue. Oh gosh, this is one of the pieces that was sort of my gateway to classical music. I think it's a great gateway for anyone. Here, I'll give you a little taste of the famous tune from it. Hopefully a lot of you recognize that. It's a really fun piece, and of course it's not a concerto, but it's sort of like a concerto. And my prime recommendation for the Rhapsody in Blue is a recording from 1959, which sounds beautiful in this. I think this is another one of those full-dimensional sound Capitol recordings. This is Leonard Pinario with Felix Slotkin and the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra. Wonderful sound. And their interpretation is a good mix of the jazzy elements with the symphonic elements. Pinario plays lights out. The orchestra is having a blast. And the sound quality is great. It's really everything you could want for a recording of the Rhapsody in Blue. Now, I'll also mention there's the American in Paris, which doesn't feature a pianist, but it's usually coupled with the Rhapsody in Blue. That also has a great recording here from Slotkin. Another famous recording from the same year, 1959, is, of course, Bernstein, Leonard Bernstein, conducting the Columbia Symphony in the Rhapsody in Blue and then the New York Philharmonic in the American in Paris. This is a little bit more on the symphonic side, but it's really exciting, very well recorded. Bernstein shows a lot of imagination in the piano part, and this is a strong version as well. Last but not least, we also have the composer's own version from 1924. This is available in several different editions, and it actually doesn't sound bad for a 1924 recording. Of course, it's very limited and primitive, but you do hear things fairly clearly. Gershwin himself is playing the piano part, and then the conductor who commissioned the Rhapsody in Blue, Paul Whiteman, is conducting his orchestra. It's kind of a small band. It's not that large. It's not like the New York Philharmonic. It's not what we're used to hearing today. This version is, by our standards, what we're used to today, very fast, sort of off the wall, almost strange in some ways. The way it's much more jazzy, but it's fascinating. Gershwin on the piano part just plays lights out. One thing that really strikes you about this is that you can tell that they didn't treat it as seriously as we tend to treat things today. It was more let's have fun with this. let's not treat it like a holy relic. And of course, it was fresh, new, and so it's really something you need to hear if you love Rhapsody in Blue. Okay, so that is Gershwin. Now let's talk about Grieg, a Norwegian composer who composed one of the iconic piano concertos. I'll try to give you a taste. This is probably going to come out horribly, but it has this iconic beginning. Let's see here. Okay, I told you. I'm not a professional pianist, but I do try sometimes. But I was hoping to give you a taste just that, in case you don't automatically know what the Grieg Concerto is, you might be like, oh, that's what the Grieg Concerto is. It's obviously a real powerhouse. romantic piece, but it's also, there's that dramatic opening, but it also has a lot of poetry to it as well. A lot of wonderful versions of this concerto. I'm going to start with my prime recommendation. Now, I'm going to mention several that are paired with the Schumann Piano Concerto. I would say outside of the Debussy and Ravel string quartets, there is not another set of pieces that's more often paired together, kind of linked together than these two. Maybe you can think of some other examples. But the Grieg and Schumann Piano Concertos are often recorded together. And my prime recommendation for that pairing is this one from Leon Fleischer and George Szell. Again, with the Cleveland Orchestra. This is from 1960. Again, we've already seen them before with Beethoven and Brahms. I would say this is maybe even their strongest collaboration. It is just electric. Right out the gate with that famous opening, and then Fleischer also supplies the poetic artistry in that beautiful slow movement as well. And then the last movement is exciting. George Szell and the Cleveland Orchestra just really bring it. So this is really, I think, a fantastic way to get to know these pieces. Now, there are other ways of doing it as well. You might say the more demure version, comparatively speaking, is my next choice. This is one that I really do love. This is from Solomon, someone that you may not associate with a work like Grieg. This was recorded in 1956 in fairly good sounding stereo. It's got a good depth and good warmth to it. This is with Herbert Menges and the Philharmonia. And this is a little bit more of a poetic, I say sensitive version, but I like that. I like the fact that it's not just this virtuosic showpiece, but there's a lot of beauty and warmth to it as well. Not that he's any slouch when it comes to the dramatic, powerful parts. So this is a great version. Another version that I would say sort of mixes the power and the poetry in very good sound is Radu Lupu, another pianist who is a probing pianist. Nothing is ever just simply tossed off. He's a very good in the romantic repertoire. Does wonderful Brahms and Schubert as well. This is with Andrew Previn and the London Symphony, beautifully recorded. Very sumptuous sound. The orchestra does a great job. It's a very sort of a really good example of just romantic interpretation. Very plush, and it's really a strong contender for both of these concertos. Another lovely version came from Stephen Kovacevic. This is from 1971 with Colin Davis and the BBC Symphony. Now, this is one that I would say similar to Solomon. It doesn't just hit you over the head and bowl you over. This one is one that I would say the power kind of builds more slowly, kind of picks their spots a little bit more, maybe emphasizes the more beautiful poetic parts, but then it still ends very powerfully and dramatically as well, beautifully recorded. So I would say this is also a top choice for the Grieg Concerto. Now, going back a little further, we also have both concertos played in mono from the 1940s by a brilliant pianist, Dino Lippati. Lippati was a virtuoso of the first rank, who also was just a real inventive artist, play the slow movements beautifully as well. Really exciting pianist. This is the Grieg is played with the Philharmonia, conducted by Alceo Galliera, and it was recorded in 1947. 40s sound. It's going to be a little bit dim, but it's still one that you're going to want to hear for Lippati's magical artistry. Now, a couple of versions that are not paired with the Schumann Concerto. One is really one of the strongest Grieg Concerto recordings from Clifford Curzon. This is recorded in 1959. Wonderful Decca sound. The London Symphony under Alfinn Fjellstad. They're recorded with just such immediacy, such presence. It's really that opening, for example, it just really comes, leaps out of the speakers. But then Curzon adds that, he has the powerful virtuosity, but he also has that beautiful touch. So this is a wonderful version. It's a shame that it's only the Grieg. And then finally, for my money, the most exciting Grieg concerto recording of all, even though it comes from way back in 1933, is Wilhelm Backhaus, who we've talked about earlier. This is with John Barbaroli and some group called like the New Symphony Orchestra. I'm not sure exactly who they are. I mean, it's such an old recording, they might have had a hard time tracking it down. But this is just on fire. Backhaus just plays lights out. To me, it's the most exciting Grieg concerto that I've ever heard, despite the dim sound. The middle movement is a little bit on the fast side, but he does it in such an artful way that it still sounds poetic and beautiful. And then that finale just knocks your socks off. So another great recording that is worth seeking out despite the old sound. Okay, so that is Grieg. Now we're going to move across the alphabet to Liszt. Middle Romantic era. Like Chopin, known as, first of all, a wizard virtuoso himself on the piano. He was just one of the great piano composers, and so he of course had to leave us two piano concertos as well. And like Chopin, the first one is the more famous one, and this recording is just a slam dunk. This one is famous for good reason. This is with Sviatoslav Richter, conducted by Kirill Kondrashin and the London Symphony. Came out in I think somewhere around 1960. Very good sound. The playing is lights out, just absolutely powerful, dramatic, wonderful sound from the orchestra, and then Richter's just imagination and artistry is just wonderful. So that's a great version, as is the one from, if I can find it here, Argerich, coupled with the Chopin recording, the Chopin first we mentioned earlier. So here you have the two firsts, you might say. And this is with Abbado again, with the London Symphony. And Argerich, again, she mixes this powerful virtuosity with this wonderful touch to the quieter moments. Very well accompanied by Abbado in fantastic sound. Last but not least, though, I want to mention one more version of the first by itself, and this one comes from a pianist who I wish we knew better. I wish we had in better sounding recordings, but he was one of the great virtuosos of the first half of the century, especially for Liszt, and that's Simon Barber. This is included in this box set that has the piano sonata, which is also fantastic. It was recorded live in Carnegie Hall. I wish I could tell you who the orchestra with. I don't think it's even listed here. The conductor his name is David Brockman. Sounds like a network correspondent or something, but I had never heard of him before. But whoever he is and whoever the orchestra is, they just knock it out of the park, and so does Barber. Barber was an amazing virtuoso, amazingly inventive artist. One of those, again, like someone like, say, Huberman on the violin, who could do anything, and yet it was always at the service of the music and the artistic inspiration. And then the orchestra also really brings the excitement, and at the end, this eruption of applause, which is well deserved. So again, another historic recording, kind of dim, but worth seeking out. Okay, so that is Liszt. Now we come to Felix Mendelssohn, a middle romantic composer who wrote his violin concerto in E minor. Let's see if I can give you this one here. There you go. You might know that theme. It's this beautiful theme that goes right at the gate. He puts it right out there immediately. And my top choice for this concerto is Perlman again, paired with the Bruch concerto mentioned earlier. again from 1972 with Andrei Previn and the London Symphony, and again just this very apt romantic interpretation, very lush, very sweet toned, wonderful support from Previn. It's maybe a little bit on the slower side, but I think it really works. If you do want something a little bit more with a conventionally slightly faster tempo, I also recommend Isaac Stern. Here's a violinist we haven't mentioned yet, American violinist, accompanied with the Philadelphia Orchestra and Eugene Ormandy, 1959. Pretty good recording. Stern just gives us a very natural sounding interpretation, kind of like Zering does with the Brahms Concerto. It's not, flashy. And I think that is a reason why Stern tended to be overlooked when he was compared to people like Milstein or Oistrakh or Heifetz. He was one to not impose on the music, not impose a personality, and it really works well in this Mendelssohn. So that's a great version, as is the one from Pinchas Zukerman with Leonard Bernstein conducting the New York Philharmonic. This is from 1969, and this has a lot of dramatic punch to it. Both these artists, it's a great collaboration between the two of them. It's a very dramatic version, very heartfelt, very probing. They don't just play it as a display piece. So that one's really good. Also, we have a violinist that we have not mentioned yet, and one that is sort of more obscure. She had a very kind of truncated career. Joanna Marzi. This is with Paul Kletsky and the Philharmonia, recorded in 1955. A little bit rough, but fairly decent sound. And Marzi just really brings home the drama of the piece. It's a very passionate account, and maybe a little bit raw sounding, but very heartfelt and worth seeking out. As is a version of from a coupling we mentioned earlier. That's Menuhin and Furtwängler. This is with the Berlin Philharmonic from 1952. And they also have, this is also a fairly assertive, dramatic interpretation, almost even a little bit dark, I would say, but really strong. And Furtwängler brings that symphonic strength to it as well. Fairly decent mono sound from the early 50s. Now, I do also want to mention a couple of historic versions. I guess that's technically historic, early 50s mono. But this one is really historic. This is 1933. And this is Joseph Szigeti. And this is with a wonderful conductor we haven't mentioned yet, but we mentioned him, of course, in the Symphonies video. It's Thomas Beecham with the London Philharmonic. And Szigeti, like I was saying earlier, he's more of a poised violinist. He wasn't very dramatically extrovert. This is more of a classical reading, but it's very beautiful and wonderful collaboration with Beecham. We also have a version from Fritz Kreisler, going with those recordings he made with Leo Blech and the Berlin State Opera Orchestra from the 20s. We also have this one from 1926 of the Mendelssohn Concerto. And this one shows Kreisler's warmth, his humanity, his poetry. It's a beautiful version that you should also seek out if you love the concerto. Okay, so that's Mendelssohn. Now we come to Mozart, of course, one of the giants in all of classical music, and wrote a slew of great concertos. I'm going to first talk about his clarinet concerto, which is a piece probably most famous for its beautiful slow movement that was used in the movie Out of Africa. My initial recommendation for that comes from Gervais de Pere and Peter Maag conducting the London Symphony from 1959, I believe, somewhere around there. Just really beautiful, warm version. Maag was an excellent Mozart conductor, and it's also paired with a great Sinfonia Concertante as well, which I'll mention later. You also can get a slightly newer version from 1971 with a clarinetist named Jack Brymer. This is with Neville Mariner and the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. This one, recorded in 1971, it's a little bit maybe on the cooler side, but it's very beautiful. That Adagio is just gorgeous. One of the best versions I've heard of that. As is the one from Robert Marcellus, clarinetist for the Cleveland Orchestra. George Zell liked to use his own orchestra members for solo recordings. So he recorded the Mozart Concerto with Zell and Cleveland in 1961. And this is just a really gentle, warm version, just really, really beautiful. Finally, I'm going to mention this one from 1985. This is with Thea King and Jeffrey Tate conducting the English Chamber Orchestra. Wonderful sound on this one. Of course, it's a digital recording. And King uses a basset clarinet, and what that allows her to do is play bass notes that were originally in the score that a normal modern clarinet cannot play. So you get to hear that, and it also has this wonderful, rich, dark tone. Really, really lots of beautiful energy in this recording as well, and definitely one of the top choices. Okay, so that's Mozart's clarinet concerto. Let's talk about the horn concertos. He wrote 4 of them. They're all wonderful pieces. You don't often come across concertos that feature the horn. And my first choice is the old classic. This is with Dennis Brain, just the most famous horn player of his time. He played with the Philharmonia, and here he's accompanied by the Philharmonia with Herbert von Karajan in 1953. It's a decent sounding mono. It is, the sound is a little bit recessed, not as present as with the modern recording, but you want to hear Brain in these concertos. Brain just had this wonderful tone and this fluidity and this ease and grace with which he played. And then Karajan is a wonderful accompanist, of course. So these are classics for a reason. Now, if you do want to hear a little bit a newer recording, you might want to seek out Barry Tuckwell, another one of the great horn players of the 20th century. This is a recording he made with Peter Maag and the London Symphony, somewhere around 1960, I believe. And Tuckwell is also very fluid, very, very assured playing, and Maag, of course, is a great Mozart conductor. So these are very strong versions, particularly if you want better sound quality. All right, now let's talk about the piano concertos. I would say that when you talk about the symphonies, for example, the sort of the large canons of symphonic works that you get from composers like Beethoven, Bruckner, Mahler, I would say the same applies for piano concertos with Mozart. He wrote 27 of them, including a double concerto. And they really represent Mozart at his best. I would say those and the operas are 2 areas where Mozart is particularly, as great a composer as he was, that's where he's really tops. The most famous, now it's really, there are 27 of them, but it's more the latter third of his canon of concertos that I would say are the most popular. Starting with the 20th. That is one of his most popular works in general, the one in D minor. You may have heard it in the movie Amadeus. I'll try to play a little bit here that might, ring a bell. You may recognize that. Just a really great concerto, beautiful middle movement, and a fun final movement as well. This one has a lot of great versions, so I'm just going to dive right in, starting with Clifford Curzon. Again, we've talked about him before. He had this beautiful lightness of touch. He played with this wonderful grace, which is perfect for Mozart. He is accompanied by Benjamin Britten and the English Chamber Orchestra. This is a 1970 recording. It sounds great. This is my top choice not only for the 20th, but also for the 27th. And he also has recordings of the 23rd and 24th that are all paired together in this double disc. So this is a great investment if you get this. You get all 4 concertos in wonderful sound and great playing. Another version I want to recommend, also from around the same time period, 1967, is Daniel Barenboim. He's conducting and playing. He's conducting the English Chamber Orchestra. Nice, warm, sumptuous recording. He recorded all the concertos actually with the English Chamber Orchestra, and this set here kind of brings together some of the most popular ones. The 20th is especially a good highlight of this set. He gives it like this the drama and this warmth and just great imagination. So that's a strong version as well. Now, a version from 1961 that is a strong contender in the D minor concerto is from Rudolf Serkin with George Zell and the Columbia Symphony. This is a really strong, assertive, dramatic version. Serkin was especially good in Beethoven, and this is maybe the most Beethoven sounding of the Mozart piano concertos. The sound is pretty good. So this is a strong version. Also, we have Clara Haskell, a great Mozart pianist. She's accompanied by Igor Markevich and the Lamoureux Orchestra. This is from 1960. Again, a very dramatic, powerful version. Haskell is very cleanly articulated. So that's a strong version. I also want to mention Richter. Let's see if I can find him. Here we are. We talked earlier about his his Beethoven Third Piano Concerto, and like I was saying, the Mozart goes well with the Beethoven. Actually, Beethoven wrote the most popular cadenza for the end of the first movement that's used in this D minor concerto. I'm pretty sure that's what Richter uses here, I believe. It doesn't say, but I'll take my word for it. Now, Richter, of course, was a very assertive, powerful pianist, but he actually reins it in quite nicely here in this recording of Mozart. It's sort of held back a little bit compared to what we're used to from Richter, and it's just really beautiful. He's accompanied by Stanislaw Wisłocki and the Warsaw Philharmonic, 1959 recording, sounding pretty good. So there's Richter. Now let's go to another pianist who recorded all the concertos, Murray Pariah. Like Curzon, Pariah had a beautiful light touch, great in the classical works, very, very gentle, very dignified, and just beautiful artistry. Like Barenboim, he both played and he conducted the English Chamber Orchestra. This is a 1977 recording. Sounds very good. So that's a top choice. Also, this is from the 90s, we've got Richard Good, who also recorded all the concertos. This is with the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, and this is a little bit more of an assertive, a little bit faster interpretation. It's with the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, and they're very powerful and dramatic in the orchestral part. So if that's something you're looking for, this is a good version. We also have, from 1999, Alfred Brendel and Sir Charles Mackerras with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. Another one with sort of lighter textures and more dramatic pacing, very more assertive. We're familiar with Mackerras's Scottish Chamber versions of the late Mozart symphonies, which are real exciting and dramatic, light textured. But then we have Brendel, who is a wonderfully poised classical pianist. And in a way, they sort of balance each other out very, very nicely in this concerto. And we also have a period performance from Malcolm Bilson. Period performance, it's using original instruments, of course, and he uses a pianoforte, which is similar to what you would have heard in Mozart's time. and we have John Eliot Gardner conducting the English Baroque soloists. This is a 1987 recording. So this one is much swifter, lighter. The sound of the pianoforte, it's almost like in between a piano and a harpsichord. It's very percussive. So you're going to have great clarity and transparency. And it's a really it's a nice interpretation. It's not what we're used to. It's not the sort of more romanticized D minor concerto, but it's really a beautiful sounding. And then finally, I want to mention a historical choice from Edwin Fischer. Fischer also played and conducted from the keyboard. In this case, with the London Philharmonic. This is a 1933 recording, so fairly old. But Fischer, again, he was a great Beethoven pianist, and so that lends itself very well to this concerto. Very dramatic and powerful, and his artistic insights are well worth the effort as well. Okay, so that is the 20th. Let's talk about the 21st. This one has one of Mozart's greatest themes in the Adagio, famous for its use in the Swedish film, which people in my generation have probably never even heard of, Elvira Madigan. The theme goes like this. Really beautiful, and I am going to first recommend the version that was actually used in the movie. This is with Geza Anda, who we talked about earlier with the Bartok concertos. He's both playing and conducting the Salzburg Mozarteum Camerata. This is from 1960. It's a beautiful recording. It's got warmth, but it's also very classically poised, and the middle movement is just gorgeous. It's also really beautiful in this version from Robert Casadesus and George Zell and the Cleveland Orchestra. This is just an immaculately beautiful version. Casadesus had this wonderful classical poise and soft touch, and Zell follows him that and supports him really well. It's a very gentle interpretation, just gorgeous. As is the version from Barenboim, again with the English Chamber Orchestra from the 60s. Barenboim, maybe he's a little bit more ruminative, but it's very beautiful, and he also has great artistic insights, as does Arthur Schnabel. This is a historic recording, obviously. This is from 1930, I think it's 1937. This is with Malcolm Sargent and the London Symphony. And the middle movement is really slow in this version, but it's sustained beautifully. And Schnabel just has this amazing touch as well. That by itself is worth hearing. But the whole thing is done very well. You might not always think of Schnabel as a Mozart player, but he had a beautiful touch, and he's well worth seeking out. Okay, now let's talk about the 23rd. Actually, the 23rd and the 24th, they're often paired together. So I'm going to first talk about a few pairings of those two. One that I've already discussed, and that is Clifford Curzon, which you can get by itself here. It's with Istvan Kertész and the London Symphony from 1968. Or, even better, you can get it paired again with the 20th and 27th that are conducted by Benjamin Britten. Curzon, again, brings that beautiful touch, that classical poise, very well supported by Kertész and the London Symphony. The recording is beautiful. I would say the 23rd especially is very strong. The 23rd has this gorgeous middle movement, and Curzon just interprets it just beautifully. Not to be outdone, however, we also have a very strong version of this coupling from Wilhelm Kempff. This is with Ferdinand Leitner and the Bamberg Symphony from 1961. And Kempff is just, like I mentioned earlier, he's just immaculate in his artistry. Just this wonderful soft touch. I also mentioned earlier that he's a little bit idiosyncratic in that his middle movements tended to be a little bit on the faster side, but even then, it's just so musical and beautiful that you really don't care. Beautifully recorded as well. So that's a strong version. I also want to mention finally for this coupling, Solomon, who played this and was conducted by Herbert Menges in the Philharmonia in 1955. It's in mono. It's a little bit distant, a little bit boxy sounding, but Solomon, of course, was a supreme interpreter and very intellectual and tailor-made for the classicism of these pieces. So that's one you don't want to miss either. A few singleton versions. For the 23rd, I have to mention one of the highlights from Murray Pariah's complete cycle. This was recorded in 1984, again with the English Chamber Orchestra, and it's that delicate touch. The Adagio is just one of the most beautiful ever recorded. It's just so graceful and gorgeous that this is one you want to seek out. This is also one that Barenboim did very well as well. Again, with the English Chamber Orchestra in the 1960s. I want to say that, just to differentiate himself from others, he was maybe a little bit more romantic, maybe a little bit more individual, but not by much. I mean, it's still a basic classical grace that he and balance to his playing as well, and nice warmth to both the orchestral sound and the recording. Now for the 24th, a few I want to mention. One is this one. Again, this is Casadesus. We mentioned the 21st. It's paired with the 24th, with Zell and Cleveland. And this one is, for my money, maybe the strongest of the 24th, at least in stereo sound. Really powerful and dramatic. And then there's also Casadesus' grace and soft touch as well. So that is a strong version. We also have Clara Haskell. With Markievicz and the Lamoureux Orchestra, paired with the D minor, the 20th Concerto. This one also is very, very dramatic and powerful, and she had just this great virtuosity and clarity that she played with. Finally, at least among good sounding modern versions, I also want to recommend Brendel and Macaris paired with number 20. Macaris had that great, great energy and transparency with which the Scottish Chamber Orchestra played, and then Brendel with his great classical touch as well. But not to be outdone, we also have a mono version going back to Edwin Fischer. This is with Lawrence Collingwood and the London Philharmonic, recorded in 1937. This may be actually the most dramatic of all. It's just a really fantastic performance, and Fischer with his strength and power and artistry is just wonderful. Okay, so that is the 24th. Finally, let's talk about the 27th. That is one that has another beautiful Adagio. Very well performed by Curzon in his recording with Benjamin Britten and the English Chamber Orchestra. I also want to mention Pariah. He brought that beautiful classical balance and that beautiful touch, especially to the middle movement. Is it Andante? It's a larghetto. Okay, there's adagios, andantes, and a larghetto. Sometimes they're interchangeable, but anyways, the slow movement. And it's just beautifully graceful, and like Curzon, it just makes you feel like you're entering Mozart's world, this place of nobility and grace, and wonderfully recorded, 1979 recording. Now one that's a little bit, maybe slightly heavier. Let's see if I can find this one. There it is. This is a famous version. This is with Emil Galels. Here he's supported by Karl Boehm and the Vienna Philharmonic. This is from 1973. Now it's a little bit heavier. Tempos are a little bit slower, but it's a really beautiful version. He plays with a lot of grace and delicacy, And Gilels was always a thinking artist. So this is worth seeking out. Finally, I'm going to mention again Schnabel. He again played the larghetto, the slow movement, very slowly, but he sustains it beautifully. This is again with Malcolm Sargent and the London Symphony. This is from 1937. Not bad sound quality. It's obviously going to be a little bit dim, but it's fairly clear. And you're going to want to hear Schnabel's artistic insights. This is when he was, at least for us, listening to him in the year 2023. This is the sort of stronger Schnabel compared to like the 1940s. I would love it if we could have heard Schnabel in the 20s or earlier, but the 30s is as best as we can get. All right, so that is Mozart's piano concertos. We have one more concerto to talk about for Mozart, and it's actually called the Sinfonia Concertante, and that is for violin and viola and orchestra. And my prime recommendation for that one is David Oistrakh and Igor Oistrakh, conducted by Kirill Kondrashin and the Moscow Philharmonic in 1963, again paired with that wonderful De Pere Maag clarinet concerto. And this is just a warm-hearted, lush, beautifully artistic recording, and Oistrakh with a supreme artistry. You can't go wrong. I would also, however, recommend this version, this digital version from 1982 with Yitzhak Perlman, Pinchas Zuckerman, and Zubin Mehta with the Israel Philharmonic. You have the sweet tones of Perlman, just the beautiful artistry and a great rapport between these musicians. So that's a strong contender. Finally, we also have a version from Cleveland with George Zell conducting, and again he uses soloists from his orchestra. So you have Raphael Druyan on violin, and you have Abraham Skernick on viola. And this is, as you might expect, has a little bit more energy, a little bit more crispness. So this one's a great version as well. Recorded in 1963, fairly good sound quality. Okay, so that is Mozart. Now let's move on to a 20th century composer, the Russian Prokofiev. We're going to discuss just one concerto of his, which is the third piano concerto, which is definitely one of the great concertos of the 20th century. It's very colorful, brilliant. It gives the pianist a chance to show off their virtuosity. And what better place to go than Martha Argerich? Her version here is with Claudio Abbado, the Berlin Philharmonic, recorded in 1967. She combines the virtuosity and color and brilliance and individuality, very well supported by Abbado. That is a very strong version. However, if you can stand a little older sound quality, we have one of the great concerto recordings of all time from William Capell. This is with Antal Dorati and Serge Koussevitzky conducting the Boston Symphony. It's a 1949 recording, but it actually has very good presence for its time, and it is just a stunning recording. He just plays with these powerful sonorities, amazing virtuosity. Again, kind of like hearing Heifetz on the piano, just doing amazing things. And then Dorati provides excellent support. It's just powerful, exciting. It's paired on this disc, and I think also the other, there's like a Naxos version, and I'm not sure if Dutton has put it out or not as well. An amazing Cacciatore concerto recording as well. Capell, another one of those artists who unfortunately we lost. He died young, so we don't have a lot from him, but this is just stupendous. Okay, now let's talk about Rachmaninoff, a giant of the piano, both as a player and as a composer. And his piano concertos, particularly the second and the third, which are the ones we're going to talk about, are just staples of the repertoire. Again, a chance for a pianist who really wants to show his chops his virtuoso chops. And for this one, I have a pairing that I'm recommending for both the second and the third, which is really as close to a slam dunk as you can get. And that is Byron Yanis, accompanied by Antal Dorati. In the second, he's accompanied by the Minneapolis Symphony. It was recorded in 1960. And not only are the performances amazing, but also the recording techniques they used. This is the Mercury Living Presence series, which had unbelievable vibrancy, brilliance, presence. It sounds like they're in your living room. It's just, I wish they made recordings like this still. So the combination of all that with these concertos just makes for one of the great concerto discs that has ever been made. Yanis just has amazing poetry, flexibility, artistic brilliance, and Dorati and the Minneapolis Symphony, enhanced, of course, by this wonderful recording techniques. They just really sound fabulous. So this is, for me, just a must. And it also comes with two of probably his two most popular preludes, Opus number 23, number 6, and the Opus 3, number 2, which that's one that, one of Rachmaninoff's most famous pieces. So this is just a great issue. However, like I said, the Rachmaninoff concertos are just a wonderful showpiece for a pianist. So I'm going to start with the single issues of the second, and there are some other versions that you're going to want to check out. One of them is a very famous one, Van Cliburn, the American Wunderkind, accompanied here by Fritz Reiner in the Chicago Symphony in 1958. Now, this is not as famous as its counterpart, which we'll talk about later, which is the Tchaikovsky Concerto. But I actually like the Rachmaninoff even better. This interpretation of the Rachmaninoff, it's very traditionally romantic, very grand, and Van Cliburn had that wonderful sonority he played with, which really lent itself to these huge concertos. It's just a beautifully romantic interpretation and sounding pretty good. Another Rachmaninoff specialist, if you will, was Vladimir Ashkenazy. This is with Andrei Previn and the London Symphony. This was recorded in 1971. And this is maybe slightly maybe a little slower, a little bit less aggressively dramatic, more lush, but very beautiful, very immaculate, but still powerful, and recorded very well. So this is definitely one of your prime recommendations for the Rachmaninoff second, as is this version from 1965. This is Earl Wild, accompanied by Yasha Ornstein and the Royal Philharmonic. Beautifully recorded, wonderful balance between the piano and the orchestra. And this is just a really a very natural interpretation. It's not extremely individual, but just a beautifully romantic interpretation. Wild is very powerful, but also very poetic, and it's great sounding. And incidentally, this gathers all four of the Rachmaninoff concertos along with the Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini. So for that reason alone, it may be worth acquiring. Now, for something that is a little bit more on the individual side, we have Sviatoslav Richter. And this is with Stanislaw Wisłocki conducting the Warsaw Philharmonic, 1959. And this is a little bit more idiosyncratic. It's slower. But the thing about Richter is he was a real individual thinking artist. And it's almost appropriate that he would take a piece like the Rachmaninoff Second, which you think of as a virtuoso showpiece, and he kind of slows it down and says, no, I want to make music out of this. And I think it really works. It almost has like this trance-like effect, even though it's not as overtly dramatic as we might be used to. So this is still a strong version as well. And then finally, we have to mention the composer's own. Rachmaninoff playing accompanied by Leopold Stokowski and the Philadelphia Orchestra, This is his 1929 recording. You can get all four concertos and the Rhapsody, the Paganini Rhapsody, all together in various box sets with RCA. I have this version, which just has the second, along with the Paganini Rhapsody. Rachmaninoff, surprisingly, maybe he does not treat this as much as a virtuosic showpiece as you might expect. He's not as obviously extrovert. It's a little bit more held back, a little bit more reserved, but wonderful artistic insights. Of course, he wrote the thing. So, and then you have Tchaikovsky and Philadelphia. There's that beautiful, famous theme that comes out in the middle of the final movement, which they just play lushly and beautifully. And for 1929, it's actually not a bad recording. You can hear everything fairly clearly. There's this part of the end of the middle movement that these clarinets come in with these triplets, and it's actually heard fairly well in this recording compared to even modern recordings. So you just never know. Definitely a historic recording worth seeking out. Okay, let's now talk about the third. The third. They call this sometimes the Mount Everest of piano playing. Of course, there's the movie Shine, about David Helfgott, where a big part of the movie is about conquering the third, or perhaps I should say being conquered by the third. It's such a beast to tackle. I go back, of course, to my recommendation for the second, the pairing of the second and the third with Byron Yanis and Alderati. In the third, he is accompanied by the London Symphony, and this is in 1961. If anything, it's even better than the second. I mean, they're both great. You just have everything here. You have a wonderful recording technology, wonderful orchestral support. Yanis has the full measure of the music, the virtuosity, the beautiful poetry. If you want to hear the third, I just think you have to hear the Yanis. That said, there are also some other worthy versions to seek out. One of which is the legendary Martha Argerich live recording from 1982 with Riccardo Chailly. This is with the Berlin Radio Symphony Orchestra. And Argerich, this is one of her most famous recordings because not only do you have her virtuosity in the poetry, but maybe because it's a live recording, it's a very personal, very, very passionate recording. She actually slows down quite a bit in much of this, and it's a very heartfelt reading as well as virtuosic, and it sounds pretty good. There's a little bit of noise maybe from being a live recording, but not too much. We also have this one. This is a recording from 1995. This is with Grigory Sokolov. It's one of the few recordings that he made, and this is also a very personal reading, a little bit slowed down, kind of like Richter. It's in the second. He's sort of taking this and saying, okay, this is not just a virtuosic showpiece. I can do all that. I have that power. I have the fingering and everything. But he's very probing and very individual. It may not be everybody's cup of tea, actually, for that reason, but it's a very strong version. We also have to mention, again, Earl Wild with Yasha Ornstein and the Royal Philharmonic. This is, again, I would say not terribly individualistic, the opposite of Sokolov. This one is more sort of very natural, but it's very powerful, very, very beautifully played and accompanied by the orchestra. A very strong version, and again, a great set if you want all the concertos together. Let's see, what do we have left for this one? We've got, this one is actually I think it's an early stereo recording, if not a mono recording. It's from 1955. This is Émile Galels, accompanied by André Cluton and the Paris Conservatoire. Now, one thing about this recording is the recording itself is a little strange. The balance is a little off, so the orchestra is kind of recessed. They kind of sound like they're almost in the next room. So that can make for a little bit uncomfortable listening, but it's worth listening still to, still for Gilels. He has this amazing virtuosity combined with his artistic individuality and thoughtfulness. So that's a very strong version. However, we have to talk about this one. This, for me, is maybe the, I know this is a strong statement, this may be the greatest concerto recording I've ever heard, and despite the fact that actually the sound is really not that great. It's very hissy and noisy, but the performance is unreal. And that is Vladimir Horowitz, accompanied by John Barbaroli and the New York Philharmonic, live at Carnegie Hall, 1941, and this is just lights out. This is, this is one of those things where you think this will never be replicated. Horowitz was the supreme virtuoso for Rachmaninoff. I mean, everyone held him in awe. There was nothing he couldn't do. It just seemed like just this powerful, massive sound, amazing virtuosity. And then you have Barbaroli, who is such a passionate and inspired collaborator. You hear at the end when they do the final ending, someone just yells "Bravo!" and the crowd goes crazy, and you can't blame them because it really is that good. The sound is unfortunately very kind of noisy and dim, but you put it up with it for a recording like this. Okay, so that is the third. Now let's talk about the Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini. This is actually a set of variations, and the most famous of which is Variation 18. I'll try again to play that tune here. Very popular, very famous one of Rachmaninoff's most popular melodies, of course. But this one it's really kind of a fun piece, I think, or a fun set of pieces, I really should say, and maybe a little bit lighter in character than the piano concertos. And a recording that I think really brings that out very well is this one with Leonard Pinario and the Boston Pops, led by Arthur Fiedler. This was recorded in 1963, a very good RCA sound, and there's a lot of, they really bring out the pizzazz of the different movements, and then the lush, beautiful quality of that Variation 18 as well. Pinario, I mentioned him earlier with the Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue. He's not a very well-known pianist, but boy, what we have of him was very good. So there's that one. We also have, again, from this set, where is it? From this set, we have Earl Wild and Yasha Ornstein. Their version is very, very dramatic and fun and lush and beautiful and very well recorded, great balances, so you can't go wrong with that one. You also can't go wrong with this one, Vladimir Ashkenazy, Andrei Previn, coupled in this disc at least. And I want to emphasize, by the way, they did record all four as well, but I tend to see this as the sort of pick of the litter, so to speak, the second combined with the Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini. Very lush, very beautiful. And then finally, we have the composer's own version with Tchaikovsky in Philadelphia, recorded in 1934. Again, Rachmaninoff is he's not as much of a showboat with his own music even. There's some reserve there, but it's a great collaboration, and Stokowski and Philadelphia do a wonderful job. They could be a little schmaltzy, but I like it. They do a wonderful job with that famous 18th variation. Okay, so that is Rachmaninoff. Now let's talk about Maurice Ravel, French composer. He wrote a couple of piano concertos. There's one for the left hand only, but I'm just going to focus on the one in G major. And this one has some jazz influences. It has this beautiful meditative middle movement. And one of the most famous classical recordings of all time, really, is this one from Arturo Benedetti Michelangeli. with Ettore Gracis and the Philharmonia from 1957. Maybe just a little bit of surface hiss, but otherwise a fairly good recording. And Michelangelo, he's very poised. He's kind of on the cool side, which really works well in that middle movement, especially. It's just you feel like you're in a trance listening to that. It's just so delicate. However, we also have another very famous recording from 1959 with Samson Francois, and this is with André Cléton and the Paris Conservatoire. Now, Francois is a little bit on the more assertive side. He's fairly individual, but it sounds very idiomatic. It also comes with an excellent left-hand piano concerto as well. You hear, I would say you hear a little bit more of that jazz character. Not that the Michelangelo you don't hear that, but this one you hear it maybe even more strongly. So this is really, this is another one of those cases where one recording doesn't say it all. So I would get both of these. Not to mention, we also have a very good one from Martha Argerich. This is with Claudio Abbado and the Berlin Philharmonic, 1967. You get the mix of her virtuosity and her poetry and individuality, and this is a beautiful version as well. Okay, so that's Ravel. Now we have a Spanish composer to talk about, Rodrigo, who wrote what is in essence a guitar concerto. It's the Concierto de Aranjuez. And my recommendation for this one is with Pepe Romero on guitar, accompanied by Neville Mariner and the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. This is their digital 1992 recording, not to be confused with their analog recording from a little over a decade earlier, which that one is also excellent. I have a slight preference for this one, and of course you have better sound on this one, so you can't go wrong. It's a great concerto, especially the middle movement. It's just this beautiful, ethereal, gorgeous middle movement, and in this recording especially, the sound quality really enhances that. And Romero obviously knows this music very well and plays it with this wonderful elan, and well supported by Mariner. So justly famous recording for that. Okay, now we're down to the S's. We're getting close to the end. And the first composer I'm going to talk about in the S's is Camille Saint-Saëns. And I'm going to present his 5 piano concertos, the most famous of which is the second, which I could have done just by itself, but usually or very, very often the concertos are all packaged together, so might as well talk about all of them. And my primary recommendation for that is Stephen Hough. This is with Sakari Oramo and the City of Birmingham Symphony. It was recorded in the early 2000s. Sounds fantastic. Wonderful, clear playing and recording. And the virtuosity is wonderful. It's very beautiful, very immaculate. Both the pianist and the orchestra. It's just beautifully colorful works. However, I do want to add as well for all 5 concertos this recording. This is a little bit more assertive and dramatic and powerful. This is from Jean-Marie Daré with Louis Forestier and the French Radio National Orchestra. This was recorded in the mid-50s. The sound it's a mix of mono and stereo, so that's why I don't say it's a prime recommendation, but it is really fantastic. Just amazingly virtuosic and very powerful. As is a recording of just the second by itself. Let's see if I can find it. Here we are. This one from Émile Gilels. We talked earlier about the Rachmaninoff third. If you want just the second, this is also an excellent version with André Cléton and the Paris Conservatoire from the mid-50s. And Gilels is just fantastic in this recording. He's just such not only a genius of virtuosity, but artistically as well. So that's a strong version. Okay, so that's Saint-Saëns. Now let's talk about Schumann's Piano Concerto, which in a way we've already discussed this because we talked about the Grieg Concerto. And so I'm going to start with 5 versions that pair them together that I've already discussed, and I'll just kind of repeat them here. First we have Leon Fleischer, George Zell, Cleveland Orchestra. It's fantastic, very, like the Grieg, the interpretation is very assertive and dramatic and exciting. Then we have Solomon, who gives us more of the sort of more gentle side, but even, especially I would say in the Schumann, even more than the Grieg, I think this is actually my favorite version overall because it's a very probing interpretation, and just Solomon was just such a unique artistic mind that for me this one actually makes me love the Schumann Concerto more than just about any recording I've heard. Similar things I could say about this one. Lupu with Andrew Previn and London Symphony, just beautifully lush and romantic. Also, we have, again, Kovacevic with Colin Davis from 1971. This one, again, like I said about the Grieg, it's not as overtly dramatic as, say, the Fleischer-Zell, but it picks its spots, and it's very beautiful, and I think still one of the reference recordings. Going back a little further into Monoland, we have Dino Lipati. This one is with, before we said the Grieg was with Galliera, this is with Herbert von Karajan and the Philharmonia, recorded in 1948. And again, Lipati is just a virtuosic genius. And Karajan supports him very, very well. This is a young Karajan when he was just getting his feet wet in the recording studio, but he does a fantastic job as well. This one, the recording quality is still a little bit dim. You know, it's 1940s, but it's not too bad, fairly clear. Now, before leaving the Schumann Concerto, I want to recommend one more, and let's see if I can find it here. Okay. Alfred Cortot, again, an interpretive genius, almost like, you know, makes it sound like he's composing the music himself on the spot. Very spontaneous, wonderful Schumann interpreter. This recording is from 1934, so it's rather dim. It's with Landon Ronald and the London Philharmonic, but if you love the Schumann Concerto, this is well worth it for Cortot's artistic insights. Just a real a giant personality, Cortot is. Okay, so that's Schumann. Now let's talk about 20th century composer Shostakovich. We talked about his symphonies. You know, it's a different musical language. It's still tonal, but it's different. It's kind of it can be a little bit unnerving. Very dramatic and passionate. And for Shostakovich, I'm going to talk about his first cello concerto and his first violin concerto, which are conveniently packaged together in this powerhouse coupling of David Oistrakh in the violin concerto and Mstislav Rostropovich in the cello concerto, accompanied by Oistrakh is accompanied by Dmitri Metropolis in the New York Philharmonic, 1956 recording, and then you have Rostropovich with Eugene Ormandy and the Philadelphia Orchestra from 1959. The sound quality is very good. It's very clear. You know, it's not. It doesn't have the fullness and warmth of a digital recording, but it's still fairly good. And the performances are just, I mean, both of them just fantastic. Oistrakh just does things on the violin that you don't think are even possible, and Metropolis, who in his own right is a very dramatic, was a very dramatic conductor. Together they make really one of the great concerto recordings. Just really exciting, powerful, and beautiful too. And then Rostropovich has that that warmth, that beautiful tone, matched with the beauty of the Philadelphia Orchestra. That's also a cello concerto that number one that it's hard to imagine anyone ever surpassing. So this is just a fantastic winner of a disc. Okay, so that's Shostakovich. Now let's move to Sibelius. And Sibelius wrote a violin concerto that is right up there with Mendelssohn and Brahms and Beethoven. Just a gorgeous concerto. Really just one of my favorites. And my prime recommendation for this one is, thankfully, a digital recording. This one is from 1987. Cho Liang-lin is the violinist. And he's accompanied by Esa-Pekka Salonen and the Philharmonia. And this recording, it just hits all the right notes for the Sibelius concerto. It's there's the passion, the drama. It's very warm and heartfelt, just very well paced. This is a recording that is justly famous, and they just really hit it out of the park. But it's a great concerto, so there are other really great versions as well. Not least of which is this one from Pekka Kuusisto, who he has a story similar to Van Cliburn in that Van Cliburn won the Tchaikovsky competition and then subsequently recorded a very famous Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto No. 1. Kuusisto won the International Sibelius Concerto competition as a young violinist, and so then he recorded it with Leif Segerstam and the Helsinki Philharmonic. And this is just a really intense, dramatic performance. Kuusisto has this really smooth tone, almost a little bit icy, I would say, that goes well with this piece. Of course, it's a piece he must have known, he knows very well. And it's just a very dramatic interpretation in pristine sound quality. So that one is very strong as well. We also have to talk about Jascha Heifetz. Heifetz was very well known for this concerto, and it's really almost an ideal concerto for his mix of virtuosity with control at the same time. And it's one of his best recordings for a stereo recording. This one is with Walter Handel and the Chicago Symphony, 1959, fairly well recorded. And Heifetz just brings it. He brings the drama, the virtuosity. It's very very passionate. It's really one of his best interpretations and one of his best recordings. I would say similar plaudits apply to Oistrakh. Oistrakh recorded this also in 1959 with Eugene Ormandy and the Philadelphia Orchestra. I would say Oistrakh is compared to Heifetz, and this may or may not be a good thing for the Sibelius. He's much more extrovert and emotive, I would say, really passionate. I mean, he plays like a god in this thing. It's just just really amazing. He just really goes for it. So that's a reference version as well. A little bit newer, more recent, is this one from Anne-Sophie Mutter. This is from 1995 with Andrei Previn and the Dresden Staatskapelle. This, I would say, is a little bit compared to, like, say, Oistrakh, for example, or Heifetz even. It's a little bit more introspective, not as overtly dramatic, but it's very searching, very poetic, very individual, kind of like her Brahms concerto recording with Masur. So this is well worth seeking out. Now, a couple of older ones to talk about. I have to talk about Jeanette Neveu. This is with Walter Susskind in the Philharmonia in 1945. Neveu is just such a supreme artist, so much soul and heart and passion in her playing, and this is a wonderful concerto to hear her at her best, just really going for broke. The recording is mid 1940s. It is a studio recording, so it's not terrible, but it's not great. But it's worth it to hear Neveu. However, we have to also talk about Heifetz's earlier recording. He's even better in this one, even though the recording quality is not as good. And importantly, he's really he's got a better collaborator in Thomas Beecham with the London Philharmonic, 1935. This is just a real famous recording for good reason. It's very passionate, very powerful, very dramatic. The sound quality is not too bad; it's listenable. So definitely, if you love the Sibelius, you're going to want to hear this. Okay. That is Sibelius, and we're getting close to the end now. We are now into the T's, Tchaikovsky, and there are two powerhouse concertos that Tchaikovsky wrote. The first of his three piano concertos, as well as his violin concerto. So let's start with the piano concerto. Here, I'm going to try this. Let's see. This is another one of those famous openings like the Grieg. Let's see if I can. Da 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 da. Anyways, most people, if you have any knowledge of classical music, you're going to know that famous opening. Like the Rachmaninoff piano concertos numbers 2 and 3, this one is just a great showpiece for pianists. And the first one I want to recommend for this one is, let's see where I put it, because it's a coupling again. Here it is. Martha Argerich, the coupling with her fantastic Prokofiev third. This is from 1971. It's with Charles Dutoit and the Royal Philharmonic. And one of the things that makes this a great recording is partly the accompaniment. It's this lush, beautiful sound. Dutoit does a great job with it. It's almost like a symphony written with piano, kind of like the Brahms concertos are. And then you have Argerich, who is in her prime and just sounds wonderful, virtuosic, very individual. It is just a great interpretation and where I would start. But there are many others. We, of course, need to discuss maybe the most famous of all, Van Cliburn. This is the one that, of course, put him on the map. He went over to Moscow and won the Tchaikovsky competition with this concerto conducted by Kirill Kondrashin. So then he and Kondrashin went into the recording studio with the RCA Symphony and made one of the most famous classical recordings ever made. Now, it's not one that actually, I would say, it doesn't overwhelm you with the virtuosity. It's a little bit on the slower side, actually. But Cliburn, he plays it, it does sound like a young man who is learning to appreciate this piece and showing us how wonderful it is. I mean, I know that sounds a little bit hokey, but there is that element to it of innocent discovery. He's also got the full measure of it. He's got he has this wonderful sonority to his powerful, the sounds he could create. And of course, Kondrashin knows the music very well. So this is a wonderful version, as is, let's see, where we have it here. As is this one, Earl Wild. Again, we talked about his Rachmaninoff concertos. This is with Anatole Fistulari and the Royal Philharmonic, 1962. Very well recorded. Wonderful balance between the piano and the orchestra. A very natural interpretation, very grand, very romantic, powerful, virtuosic, everything you could want. But we also have some historic versions to talk about. Let's see. One of them is, and this is not prehistoric, this is just quasi-historic, you might say. This is in 1955. This is from Emil Galels. This is with Fritz Reiner and the Chicago Symphony. And the partnership of Galels and Reiner, we talked about the Brahms second piano concerto earlier. It's just really fantastic. This is one that overwhelms you right from the beginning with the assertiveness and virtuosity and powerful playing and the orchestral support. Galels is he's just fantastic in this recording. We also have this one from Sviatoslav Richter. This is with Karel Anserl and the Czech Philharmonic. This is from 1954. And this one, mainly you want to hear it for Anserl's artistic insights, his virtuosity. He was never a boring performer. He always made music out of everything he played. And so that's worth hearing, even though the sound is somewhat distant. The orchestral sound is, it has a little bit of a cavernous quality to it. It's still worth hearing for the sake of hearing Richter. Now, another one from the early days, and this is really early days. This is from 1929. Comes from Solomon. Solomon conducted recorded the first piano concerto with Hamilton Hardy and the Halle Orchestra. And again, with Solomon, you get that musicianship with everything, in addition to his powerful playing and virtuosity, which, to be honest, I would say, especially in this earlier recording, he even shows it more here than he does in his later recordings. So he's got the full measure of the power of virtuosity, but then also this wonderful artistic mind as well. The sound, of course, is very distant. It's 1929. What are you going to expect? But it's listenable. Through the crackles. It's still one that if you enjoy this piece, you might want to check out this interpretation. However, one of the great historical recordings of all time, I have to say, is this legendary recording, justly legendary. Vladimir Horowitz with Arturo Toscanini. I don't know why they only show Toscanini here. I guess it's the Toscanini edition, but Horowitz was playing. In fact, it's not just the concerto, but it's the Mussorgsky Pictures and Exhibition with Horowitz on piano. So I mean, this I don't know why they don't feature Horowitz on the cover, but anyways, this recording is just electric. It's just amazing. It was recorded live at Carnegie Hall, 1943. It was a war bonds concert, so it was made to raise funds for the war. And Horowitz and Toscanini together are just on fire. It's just one of those performances that we're lucky to have caught on tape, where everybody is of just one artistic mind and just going for it, and just playing is just out of this world. The sound is actually fairly good, especially for a live recording. It's fairly clear. It's a little bit on the dry side, which is what you normally expect from Toscanini's NBC recordings. So it's fairly listenable, actually, and I think it's actually a good gateway, so to speak, for people who are hesitant to listen to pre-stereo recordings. One of the great legendary recordings of all time. Okay, so that's Piano Concerto number 1. Let's talk about his Violin Concerto. Again, one of those there's the Beethoven, Brahms, Mendelssohn, Sibelius, which we just talked about, and then you have to add Tchaikovsky to that pantheon of great violin concertos. A wonderful showpiece for violin virtuosos. And we're fortunate to have a very good recording in digital sound from Maxim Vengerov. This was recorded with Claudio Abbado and the Berlin Philharmonic in 1995. Vengerov is not only a supreme virtuoso, but he's also a thoughtful artist, so he brings out the beautiful, softer aspects of the piece as well. Abbado does an excellent job supporting him. It's very exciting, so that's a great digital version. We also need to talk about Oistrakh. Oistrakh was wonderful in this concerto. Couple of versions to discuss. Again, it's the old debate because he had so many versions of everything. I tend to favor this one. This is the earlier one from 1954 It is mono. It's with Franz Konwiczny and then the Dresden Staatskapelle, just like the Brahms Concerto. I think this shows Oistrakh at his best. He shows his, he not only brings the virtuosity, but there's a warmth to his playing, just a beautiful fluidity. We also then have the one from 1959 with, this is in stereo, with Eugene Ormandy and the Philadelphia Orchestra. This is with the Sibelius Concerto. And this one, I would say it's just slightly less inspired, but it's still really good. You're comparing apples and oranges, I guess. The tone is a little thicker, I would say, in this later recording. So maybe that's why for me it doesn't have that dexterity perhaps of the earlier one, but it's still very good. And Oistrakh is just a supreme artist as well as a virtuoso. So you're going to want to hear him in this concerto. Another really great one, violinist that we have not discussed yet, Russian violinist, is Leonid Kogan. This recording is with Konstantin Silvestri and the Paris Conservatoire. It was recorded in 1959. A little bit rough sounding, but fairly good, fairly clear. And Kogan was just a real passionate performer, a great virtuoso who every time you hear him, no matter what he's playing, he's always bringing in this. You can tell there's this passionate commitment behind his playing. And his is a wonderful Tchaikovsky concerto. As is, we need to discuss. Where did he go? Heifetz. I talked about this earlier. I'm a little bit cool on this recording of the Brahms Concerto with Fritz Reiner. I'm not quite as cool on the Tchaikovsky. This is from 1957, again with Fritz Reiner and the Chicago Symphony. Maybe it's because the Tchaikovsky lends itself more to sort of the virtuosic display. But even in this recording, I think the speeds are a little bit fast for the sake of fast, in my opinion. At the same time, if at the end of the day this is a display piece for Heifetz's brilliance, it's still worth hearing for that reason, because he's amazing. There's the virtuosity and there's the ease and the grace with which he played. He was like the Michael Jordan of violinists, if you think of it in those terms. He could do things that no one else could. That said, though, just like in the Brahms, I think his earlier version actually shows him in better form in terms of communicating passion and performing in a way that it doesn't feel like he's just in a rush to get through it and prove how quickly he can play. And that is this version from 1937 with John Barbaroli and the London Philharmonic. They give the piece a little bit more time to breathe. And this really is one of the great Tchaikovsky concerto recordings. Supreme virtuosity, supreme artistry, and Barbaroli is a wonderful accompanist. However, if I am going to pick a version of the Tchaikovsky concerto to live with, I actually, my favorite is the one from Bronislaw Huberman, and he gave us actually two versions. Now, here you get virtuosity with this artistic imagination and warmth and heart. It's just all of it together. Huberman's Tchaikovsky concerto just has to be heard. This is the earlier version. This is coupled on Naxos with the Beethoven concerto that he did with Zell. This is from 1928 with William Steinberg and the Berlin Staatskapelle. And it actually is a pretty good sounding recording from 1928, believe it or not. It's a studio recording. And it's limited and distant, but you can hear it pretty well. And Huberman just is amazing in this recording. He's just it's so spontaneous sounding, and he uses the virtuosity in a way not to bring attention to himself, but to serve the music. Now I also love this version. This is coupled with that Brahms concerto recording from Carnegie Hall. This was also live in Carnegie Hall with Eugene Ormandy and the Philadelphia Orchestra. This is 1946. He only died, I think, like the very next year. But it is very good. It's probably not quite as impressive from a technical standpoint as the earlier recording. The tone also was a little bit more raw, but it still is one of the best Tchaikovsky concerto recordings I've ever heard. And the sound quality, strangely enough, the earlier one actually sounds more clear because it's a studio recording. This one's a little bit more rough, but there is more presence to it. So there is that. So either way, Huberman's Tchaikovsky, in my opinion, just has to be heard. Okay, so that is Tchaikovsky. Now we've come to the last composer of all, Vivaldi. Let's talk about the Vivaldi Four Seasons. And this is really a piece that, it's maybe not everyone knows. It's called the Four Seasons, but it's actually a set of violin concertos, 4 violin concertos. And so it does feature a soloist, but I would say compared to most violin concertos, the conductor and the ensemble is very important as well. My prime recommendation for this one is an old classic, well, quasi-old, I guess. It's still a fairly good sound. And this is the one from Neville Marriner and the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, with Alan Loveday as the violin soloist. It was recorded in 1969. It sounds great. It still sounds very good. And it's just beautiful. It's just ethereal. You feel like you're traveling into this I know this sounds hokey, but it just feels like you're in this magical world. It's just so, the sound they produce is just so gorgeous. It's sumptuously recorded. And the interpretation is excellent. It might be on the slow side for some who are used to some of the recordings that we'll get to that are the more modern recordings. But to me, it's a perfect interpretation. Actually, it sounds very natural, and this was a classic for many decades, and I still think it's the best way to be introduced to the Vivaldi Four Seasons. Now, another classic from a little bit earlier, actually, is this one from 1959. This is with Felix Ao is the violinist, and the group Imusiji, who are Baroque specialists who recorded the Vivaldi Four Seasons actually several times. In fact, they did one with Ao 4 years earlier, but this is the stereo version. And this one is just gorgeous. Very passionate music making. This one is a little bit on the slower side, but it to my ear, it still works, and at least as a supplement, even if you want a faster, more aggressive interpretation, everyone should still hear this one. Now, sticking with the sort of modern instrument versions, I want to talk about this one with Salvatore Accardo. This is with the what are they called? They're called the I Solisti delle Settimane Internazionali di Napoli. That rolls off the tongue, right? Recorded in 1987, an all-Italian group. And this is very lush, very beautiful. It's actually, I would say, a little bit on the cool side, but very ethereal and beautiful, and very natural sounding. Finally, among modern instrument versions, I also want to recommend this one. The sort of star power one, right? Itzhak Perlman is the soloist with the London Philharmonic, recorded in 1976. And definitely this is, they were showcasing Perlman. He's actually balanced a little bit forward. The interpretation is a little bit on the slow side. This is what the proverbial big band Baroque style, but it still is really beautiful. And Perlman plays, he has that wonderful sweet tone. And if you love the Vivaldi Four Seasons, this is a version to seek out as well. However, let's talk about period instrument versions. There's a ton of them. Everyone loves to get their hands on the Four Seasons. And I think this might have been the very first one, is still one of the best. And this is from Trevor Pinnock with the English Concert. The violinist is Simon Standage. And for a period performance, this one is very full sounding, very opulent. It's not terribly fast. It's actually fairly grounded, and it's just gorgeous. Just a beautiful interpretation and very very nice full sound quality. So even if you're not, if you think you don't like period instruments, I would urge you to at least hear this one. Also, here's one featuring Andrew Manza, who we talked about 10 hours ago with the Bach concertos. He's accompanied here by Ton Koopman and the Amsterdam Baroque Orchestra. This is from 1993. And this version just has wonderful spirit and energy about it, very exuberant, just a joy to listen to. Here's a version from a few years later, 1996. This is Gottfried von der Goltz with the Freiburg Baroque Orchestra. And this one is it's a very beautiful version. It has a nice acoustic, a nice ambiance around it, and it's definitely they hit their spots with the dramatic virtuosic sections, but it's also got this delicate beauty to it as well. So that's a great version. I just have a few more left. This one is from this is the Drottningham Baroque Ensemble. What, do I have this upside down? No, okay, that's right. The title's just at the bottom there. Okay, it's with Niels Erik Sparf on violin, and this was recorded in 1984. And this is sort of, I think of this almost as a minimalist version, because the emotions and the tone is sort of held in check. It's sort of, there's a simplicity to it and a reticence to it, which may not be everybody's cup of tea. But it does work very well, and it's very beautiful and wonderful virtuosity as well. So that one is a strong choice. And then if you want something a little bit more, very fast and assertive and passionate, boy, this one is just, this one's on fire. This is Giuliano Carmignola with Andrea Marcon conducting the Venice Baroque Orchestra. This was recorded in 1999, and this one it's very fast. It may be even a little bit too hard driven and aggressive for some, but that Vivaldi Four Seasons is such a wonderful work that to me it's worth having in multiple versions, and this definitely is something worth hearing. It's just amazingly impressive and invigorating. So that is the period instrument versions. I just want to mention one more Four Seasons, and this one is the super old. This is the 1947 Louis Kaufmann, and then a chamber orchestra was called the chamber. What is it called? The chamber orchestra. Concert Hall Chamber Orchestra, conducted by Henry Soboda. This is one of the pioneering versions of Vivaldi Four Seasons that popularized the work for the first time. And as you often is the case with these older recordings, it's not the faster speeds and the virtuosity that we're used to today, but it's also got this heartfelt earnestness about it. There's a sense of discovery here, because these were not, at this point, these were not over-recorded works yet. And I think they really do, despite the sound quality and maybe the you might say the antiquated way of performing Baroque music, they really do communicate the music well, with the genuine warm-heartedness and beauty of tone as well. So this is worth hearing if you like the Vivaldi Four Seasons. Okay, that's it. Finally came to the end. I hope you made it this far. I want to remind you again that these videos, I know they're very long, but they are divided into chapters. So you can click through if you feel like, visiting the Mozart piano concertos or the Brahms violin concerto or the Prokofiev third piano concerto. You can always skip around. So I hope you are taking advantage of that rather than just sitting here for several hours. All right, thank you, and happy listening.